She woke up married to a stranger, and that was the least terrifying thing about him. A high school teacher drowning in debt. A man whose name made powerful people go quiet. One drunken night in Las Vegas. One contract worth $250,000. What began as the worst mistake of her life was about to become the only real thing in it. If you've ever made a decision that changed everything, stay with me until the end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. At the sea, the headache hit her before consciousness did. It rolled in like a wave breaking against the inside of her skull. Dense, merciless, the kind that lives behind the eyes and doesn't negotiate. Avery Hart surfaced from sleep the way a person surfaces from deep water. Disoriented, gasping slightly, hands reaching for something solid before her brain had any idea what solid meant in this particular moment. Her fingers found silk. That was wrong. She didn't own silk sheets. She owned a Target comforter in faded blue that she'd had since her first year of teaching, and a mattress that dipped slightly on the left side from 6 years of sleeping in the same position. Whatever her fingers were touching right now was not that. It was cool and smooth and expensive in a way she could feel without seeing, the kind of fabric that costs more per yard than she spent on groceries in a month. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was high, not apartment high, not even hotel high in the normal sense. It was the kind of ceiling that existed in a different tax bracket than anything she'd ever slept beneath. White, coffered, edged with pale crown molding, lit from below by the warm ambient glow of recessed lighting that someone had left on low. There was a chandelier, not a cheap one. The crystals caught the low light and threw it back in fractured pieces across the ceiling like a slow, expensive constellation. Avery sat up. The room was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the far wall showed a Las Vegas skyline still glittering against a sky that had gone the deep purple gray of very early morning, that false hour between 3 and 5 when the city pretends the night hasn't ended. The strip was out there somewhere, blinking and blazing, indifferent. Closer, the grounds below the window showed a lit swimming pool, perfectly blue, perfectly still, surrounded by manicured hedges and outdoor furniture that no one was currently using. She was in a bed large enough to sleep 4 adults comfortably. She was wearing a silk nightgown the color of champagne that she had never seen before in her life. And on her left hand, catching the light in a way that made her stomach drop straight through the mattress and into whatever was below this floor. A ring. Diamond, substantial. Set in platinum or white gold, she couldn't tell which, and flanked by smaller stones that formed a band so precisely made, it looked like something from a store window on Rodeo Drive, rather than anything that belonged on the finger of a 31-year-old 10th grade English teacher from Sacramento, who had come to Las Vegas for her best friend's bachelorette weekend with a budget of $400 and the firm intention of drinking exactly enough, but not too much. Avery stared at the ring for a long moment. Then she said, out loud, to the empty room, "Absolutely not." The room didn't answer. It was too tasteful for that. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. The floor was marble, cold against her bare feet, and it grounded her in the way that cold surfaces do, sharp, real, undeniable. She stood up and immediately had to grab the bedpost because the room tilted. Not severely. Just enough to remind her that whatever she'd consumed the night before was still very much present in her bloodstream, metabolizing slowly, saying hello. Her last clear memory was the Velvet Room, the private bar on the 32nd floor of the Marquette Hotel, where Dana's maid of honor had booked a table for 8. The Champagne Tower. Dana herself in a rhinestone sash and a crown that kept sliding sideways, laughing too loud, beautiful and happy, in the way that brides are happy when the whole world is temporarily arranged to celebrate them. Avery remembered clinking glasses. She remembered a round of shots that she had not intended to take, but took anyway because the bartender was charming and Dana had given her a look. She remembered dancing. She remembered the lights being very bright and then very soft and then nothing. Nothing after that. She crossed to the window and looked down at the pool, then out at the city, then at her own reflection in the glass. The reflection showed a woman with dark hair that had mostly escaped whatever style it had been in the night before. Smudged mascara under brown eyes that were wide and alarmed, a silk nightgown that fit her like it had been chosen for her specifically, and a diamond ring that caught the light every time her hand moved. "Okay," she said to her reflection. "Think." Her reflection looked unconvinced that thinking was going to help. There was a door to her left, slightly ajar, showing marble and a vessel sink that probably cost more than her car. She went in, used the bathroom, found a new toothbrush still in its packaging on the counter, beside a selection of toiletries that were all high-end and unopened. Someone had anticipated a guest. The thought sat in her stomach uneasily, next to the hangover and the growing dread. She found her phone on the bathroom counter. It was dead. She found a charger beside it, her brand, which was strange, and plugged it in and waited. When the screen lit up, the notifications were a solid wall. 17 texts from Dana, 9 from Mia, 4 from her mother, which meant someone had told her mother something, and a string of missed calls that ran from midnight through to 4 in the morning. The texts from Dana started coherent and escalated quickly. "Where did you go? We lost you after the Marquette." Then 40 minutes later, "Avery, call me." Then, "Avery." Then at 2:47 a.m., "Someone said they saw you at the chapel on Flamingo with a man. Please tell me that's not true. Call me." Avery read that one twice. Then she looked at the ring. Then she read it again. She was still staring at her phone when the bedroom door opened. The man who walked in was not what she expected, though she couldn't have said what she expected. He was tall, several inches over 6 feet, and he moved through the doorway with the unhurried ease of someone who had never in his life entered a room uncertain of his welcome. He was dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, no tie, looking like someone who had been awake for hours or possibly hadn't slept at all. His face was hard-planed and striking in a way that wasn't quite handsome in any conventional sense. Too angular for that, jaw too set, eyes too sharp, but impossible to look away from. Dark hair, slightly disheveled, a faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. I was carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked at her standing in the bathroom doorway holding her phone, registered her expression, and said with complete calm, "You're awake." "Who are you?" Avery said. Not a question, a demand, and "Roman D. Luca." He set one of the cups on the dresser closest to her. "You take it black. You mentioned that last night." "I don't know you." "You did, by the end of the evening." He held his own cup and watched her without apparent discomfort. His eyes were dark, a shade of brown so deep it read nearly black in the low morning light, and they held a quality that she would spend a long time afterward trying to name accurately. Not cold exactly. Contained, like a very still body of water where you couldn't tell the depth. "What is this ring?" she said. "Your wedding ring." The words landed in the room and stayed there. Avery heard them. She processed them. She looked at the ring again. The diamond catching light. The platinum band sitting on her finger with the settled weight of something real. And then she looked at Roman DeLuca, who was watching her with an expression that suggested he had anticipated this exact reaction and had prepared himself for it. "That's not—" She stopped, started again. "That is not possible. I have the license." "You have to be—" She crossed the room, not entirely steadily, and stopped in front of him. He didn't move back. They were close enough that she had to tip her chin up slightly to maintain eye contact, which she resented. "You're telling me we got married?" "At 11:53 last night, Chapel of Eternal Promises on Flamingo Road. The officiant's name was Gerald. He had a bolo tie." "I was drunk." "Yes. We were both—" "I was not drunk." He said it flatly, without apology or defensiveness. "Just a fact, offered plainly. I was entirely sober." The silence that followed was not comfortable. Avery took a step back from him. Her mind was moving fast and not well, skipping between the ring and his face, and Dana's texts, and the word license, and the ceiling, and the skyline, trying to build a coherent structure out of scattered pieces and failing because there was a foundational piece missing, namely, how does a sober adult man end up in a midnight wedding chapel in Las Vegas with a woman he has met once, who is clearly intoxicated, and go through with the ceremony? "Why?" she said. I was quiet for a moment. Not evasive. She got the impression he wasn't someone who evaded. More like he was choosing the specific words he wanted rather than grabbing whatever came first. "That's a longer conversation," he said. "One I'd suggest we have after you've eaten something. You look like you're going to either pass out or come at me, and I'd rather you were steady for either." "I want an annulment." "I know. Today. I want to start the process today." "You can." He moved past her to the window, looked out at the pool, the city. His profile against the glass was sharp and still. "Or you can hear what I'm offering first." "You're offering something." "Yes. You married a stranger at midnight and you have an offer ready. Her voice came out flat. That's not alarming at all. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something adjacent to it. Drink your coffee, he said. Then we'll talk. Avery drank the coffee. She drank it standing in the bedroom of a man she'd married while blackout drunk, in a nightgown that wasn't hers, wearing a ring that could probably pay off her student loans twice over, watching the Las Vegas sky turn from purple-gray to pale orange as the sun began its indifferent ascent over the desert. She drank it black because she did, in fact, take it black. And the fact that he'd remembered, that he'd anticipated, sat uncomfortably in the back of her mind alongside everything else. He gave her space. He sat in a chair near the window, not crowding her, not watching her too closely. She appreciated that more than she wanted to. By the time the cup was half empty, her headache had retreated from a roar to a manageable throb, and her mind was assembling itself into something functional. She sat on the edge of the bed, because her legs were not going to hold her up indefinitely, and looked at him. Talk, she said. Roman set down his own cup. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and the quality of his focus sharpened in a way she felt physically, like the room had changed temperature by a degree. I need a wife, he said. For 6 months. Avery waited. My father is dying, he said. He has a terminal diagnosis, 6 to 8 months. He is also the chairman of DeLuca Holdings, which is a privately held company with assets across commercial real estate, logistics, and private equity. When he dies, control passes to the board. There are people on that board who have been waiting for that moment for a long time. He paused. My father has a specific clause in the company's operating agreement. It can be overridden if a sitting family member holds a controlling interest at the time of his death. I am the only family member positioned to hold that interest, but my father believes very strongly in certain things. One of those things is that his successor should be married, settled, stable. That's archaic, yes, and completely Avery. He said her name and it stopped her. Not because he raised his voice, he didn't, but because of the directness of it, like he'd used her name before. Like it was already familiar. I know what it is. I'm not asking you to agree with it. I'm asking you to help me with it. By being your fake wife. By being my wife. We are legally already married. The performance is optional. The legal status is real. She stared at him. He stared back. What does it pay? She said. And even as she asked it, she hated herself slightly for asking it. Because asking was already a concession. Asking meant she was considering it. And she'd walked into this room fully intending not to consider it. $250,000, he said. Paid in installments. 50 up front, 50 at 3 months, 150 at the end of the 6-month term when you signed the divorce papers. The number sat in the room. Avery let it sit there. She thought about this balance on her student loans, $47,000. Accruing interest at a rate that felt personal. She thought about her mother's hospital bills from last year, still partially outstanding, still calling her phone from unknown numbers. She thought about her apartment in Sacramento, the radiator that clanged all winter, the way the ceiling in the hallway had started showing a damp patch that the landlord kept promising to address. She thought about her teaching salary, which was not nothing, but was also not enough to do anything except maintain the exact life she was already living with no margin for error and no visible path to a different one. She thought about $250,000. What does it actually involve, she said, specifically? Living here. This house is the primary residence, though there are others we'll use. Appearing at family dinners, business events, public appearances. Presenting as a genuine couple. My father will want to spend time with you. He's ill, but he's sharp. His people will watch you. You'll need to be convincing. And you'll be convincing too? Or am I just performing on my own? Something moved in his expression. I'll hold up my end. What about my job? My life in Sacramento. The school year ends in 3 weeks. That's June. The 6 months runs through December. You can return to teaching in January. He paused. I'll compensate for any professional disruption beyond that. And She stopped. Chose the words. This is contractual. There are limits. Yes. He didn't hesitate and he didn't look away. I'll have an agreement drawn up today. Explicit terms. Your own attorney should review it. I don't have an attorney. I'll provide one. Independent, no conflict of interest. She looked at him for a long moment. The morning light was growing, washing slowly across the room, and in it she could see him more clearly now. The fine quality of his shirt, The watch on his left wrist that was expensive without being showy. The way he held himself with a stillness that wasn't tension but was something adjacent to it. A man used to being watched, used to being assessed, used to waiting for people to make up their minds. What did I say last night? She said. She gestured vaguely. Whatever happened? You told me you were a teacher, he said. You told me you hated Las Vegas, but that it was your best friend's party. So you were here anyway. You told me you hadn't been on a date in 8 months because you were too tired to be interesting to anyone. You told me your mother was sick and that you were scared all the time about money, but you'd gotten very good at not showing it. He said it all without inflection, reciting it back the way someone recites facts. And then you told me that you thought I had sad eyes, and you asked if I wanted to get married, and I said yes. The last part hit her unexpectedly. Not the content, the way he said it. I said yes. Quietly. Like it meant something that he wasn't going to explain. I asked you, she said. Yes. And you, a sober adult, said yes to a drunk stranger's proposal. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I needed exactly what I told you I needed, and because you said the thing about sad eyes, and it was accurate, and no one had been accurate about me in a long time. Avery looked at her coffee cup, then at the ring, then at Roman DeLuca, who was watching her with those dark, contained eyes and waiting. I need to call my friend, she said. I need to eat something, and I need you to not be in the room while I think. He stood. I'll have breakfast sent up. And the license. I want to see it. He reached into the breast pocket of his shirt and held it out. She took it. Clark County, Nevada. Both names. A date. A time. 2 signatures. An official seal. The paper was real. The signatures were real. One of them was hers. In her own handwriting. A little larger and less controlled than usual, but unmistakably hers. Avery Hart DeLuca, the license said. She stared at that for a while. The breakfast was extraordinary. She didn't want to care about that, but she did, because she hadn't eaten since a mediocre Caesar salad on the flight in, and the tray that arrived, delivered by a quiet woman who asked nothing and looked at nothing, held eggs prepared exactly as she preferred them, without being asked, fruit, toast, orange juice that was fresh squeezed and tasted nothing like the version from a carton. She sat on the bedroom balcony in a robe she found in the closet and called Dana while she ate. Dana picked up on the first ring. Are you okay? Dana said. Not hello, just that. I'm fine, Avery looked at the ring catching the morning sun. Something happened. Tell me you didn't. Avery, please tell me you didn't actually. I need you to not panic while I explain. The fact that you're telling me not to panic is making me panic. Donna, a breath on the other end. Then, okay, I'm listening. Avery told her. The room, the ring. Roman DeLuca's calm recitation of the previous night's events. The offer. The number. She kept her voice level, which took effort, because saying it aloud to someone who knew her, someone who knew the debt, and her mother and the apartment with the leaking ceiling, made it feel both more real and more surreal simultaneously. Dana was quiet for a long time after she finished. $250,000, Dana said finally. Yes. To just live in a mansion and go to dinner parties for 6 months. That's a simplification, but essentially. And the license is real. I'm looking at it right now. Another silence. What do you know about him? Dana said. Who is he? He says DeLuca Holdings, real estate, logistics, private equity. She could hear Dana's fingers on a keyboard. Then, okay, so Roman DeLuca. Yeah, he's... A pause. He's real. Like genuinely real. His father is Dominic DeLuca. DeLuca Holdings is... She stopped. Avery, this company is worth somewhere between $6 and $8 billion, depending on which source you believe. The orange juice suddenly tasted different. Okay. He's not listed as CEO yet, but he's listed as Executive Vice President. There are a bunch of news articles about the company, but almost nothing personal about him. Like he doesn't have a public profile, no social media I can find. There are a few photos from galas and things. He is extremely attractive, just as an objective statement. But there's nothing that tells you who he actually is. He says his father is dying. Or he's lying. Why would he lie? He could have just let me wake up, get the annulment, and disappear. Unless the marriage itself is the point and he needs it documented for some legal thing before you get the annulment. Avery paused. She hadn't thought of that. That would mean the whole offer is a distraction. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying you don't know him, and you should be careful. Dana's voice was careful now, the way it got when she was being serious rather than reactive. What does your gut say? Avery thought about dark, contained eyes. The steady way he'd delivered information. The specific, unrehearsed quality of what he'd told her she'd said the night before. The way he'd answered, I said yes quietly, like the admission cost him something small. I don't know, she said honestly. I think I want to at least hear the full terms. Okay, Dana said. Okay, but Avery, listen to the lawyer. Actually listen. Don't let the money make you skip steps. I'm not. You're already considering it. I know you. You're calculating whether it solves the hospital bills. Avery said nothing. Yeah, Dana said quietly. Just be careful, okay? Call me tonight. She met him in what turned out to be a study on the ground floor, a room lined with bookshelves that were actually full, not decorative, and furnished with leather chairs and a desk the size of a small country. He was behind the desk when she came in, and he didn't pretend to be doing something else. He just looked up and waited. I have questions, Avery said. She sat across from him without being invited. Real ones, not the terms. I'll get those from the lawyer. I mean about you. Go ahead. Your business. What is it exactly? And don't give me the real estate and logistics answer. I want the actual answer. Something shifted in his face, barely perceptible. DeLuca Holdings is a legitimate holding company with legitimate assets and legitimate revenue streams. That's a careful sentence. It is. What's the part of the business that requires a careful sentence? I was quiet. Not evasive. She was getting a clearer read on him now, could distinguish between him withholding and him choosing. This was choosing. My family has historical connections to people and organizations outside what is typically called legitimate business, he said. Those connections are managed. They're not the dominant part of what we do. But they exist, and I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. Avery processed that. Are you dangerous? To you? No. That's not the same as saying no. It's the accurate answer. He met her eyes. You would be protected while you're with me. Completely. You would not be involved in anything outside the role I described. I give you my word on that. Your word, she said, not dismissively, testing the weight of it. It's what I have to offer on that question, he said. I don't have a better currency. She looked around the study. The books were real. Spines worn, some of them. There was a photograph on the desk she couldn't see clearly from where she sat. The room smelled like leather and something faintly herbal, a candle or a plant. And it had the quality of a room that was actually lived in rather than staged. The dinner parties, she said. The family. What am I walking into? My father is formidable but fair. My mother died when I was young. I have one brother, Marco, who will be suspicious and unpleasant because that's his nature. There are associates, people adjacent to the family, who will watch you and test you. The social performance is genuinely a performance, and it will require effort. And when I fail a test, when someone figures out it's fake, then we adjust. I'm not expecting perfect. I'm expecting genuine effort and the ability to hold under pressure. He paused. You're a teacher. You stand in front of rooms full of people who are actively hoping you'll stumble. You've been doing that for 6 years. That's a skill. She didn't expect that. You looked me up. Of course I did, this morning, while I was asleep. Yes? He didn't apologize for it. What else did you find? That you're good at your job. That your students' test scores are above district average. That you have 2 degrees and $62,000 in combined debt. That your mother was hospitalized for a cardiac event last October, and that the outstanding balance on that admission is approximately $14,000. He said it plainly, without using it as leverage, just listing it the way he listed everything, like information was simply information. I'm not saying those things to pressure you. I'm saying them so you know I understand the situation you're in. The offer is real. The terms will be fair, and I understand why you need to consider it carefully. Avery was quiet for a moment. I'm going to talk to the lawyer, she said. Of course. And if the terms aren't right, I'm going to walk out of here and file for the annulment, and this is over. Understood. And if I agree... She stopped. tried to find the exact words for the thing she needed to say. If I agree, I need you to understand that I'm not... She pressed her lips together. I'm doing this for the money. That's it. I'm not going to pretend otherwise with you, even if I'm pretending everything else with everyone else. You and I are going to be honest with each other about what this is. Can you commit to that? Roman looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression she couldn't read. Not quite surprise, not quite recognition. Something that sat between them. Yes, he said. I can commit to that. She stood up. Then have the lawyer here this afternoon. The lawyer's name was Patricia Ewan, and she arrived at 2 p.m. in a charcoal suit with a leather briefcase and the brisk, no-nonsense energy of someone who had seen every flavor of unusual situation and had learned not to register surprise. She met with Avery alone for 40 minutes in a separate room before they reviewed the contract together. The contract was thorough. Avery read every line, which Patricia had clearly anticipated and appreciated, making notes in the margins of her own copy while Avery worked through it. The financial terms were exactly as Roman had stated. The scope was clearly defined: public appearances, family events, shared residence, social performance. The limits were explicit and enforceable. No physical requirements beyond what would be expected of a married couple in public settings. No demand for intimacy. Full personal autonomy maintained within the contracted role. An NDA running both directions. A termination clause that protected Avery's financial interests even if Roman chose to end the arrangement early. It was, Patricia told her, a contract that had been written by someone who anticipated objections and removed them preemptively. Which is either very professional or very practiced, Avery said. Both aren't mutually exclusive, Patricia said. She capped her pen. The terms are genuinely protective of your interests. That doesn't mean this is a straightforward situation. Do you understand what you're agreeing to enter? A wealthy man's family theater, Avery said. A wealthy man's complicated family theater, Patricia said. There's a difference. Have you done any research on the DeLuca family? Some. Patricia looked at her evenly. Do more, she said, before you sign. What am I going to find? Nothing specific, that's the thing. Very little specific, which, in my experience, is itself specific. Avery held that. But the contract is sound. The contract is sound. Patricia closed her briefcase. The contract is not the risk. What? She signed it at 4:30 in the afternoon. She signed it in Roman's study, at his desk, with him seated across from her and Patricia Ewan beside her, and the late desert sun coming sideways through the tall windows. She signed it because the contract was sound and because Patricia's warning, while noted, was not specific enough to override the very specific reality of $62,000 in debt and her mother's outstanding hospital bill and a ceiling in Sacramento with a damp patch that nobody was going to fix. She signed it because she had always been practical, even when practicality felt like surrender. She set the pen down and looked at Roman. I was watching her. That still contained quality. The light caught the side of his face, and for a moment she saw what she thought she'd meant last night, drunk, and apparently more honest than she usually allowed herself to be. The specific quality of sadness that lived in the architecture of a person's face when they'd carried something heavy for long enough that it had become structural. Okay, she said. What happens now? Now you meet my father, he said. He's coming for dinner on Friday. That gives you 3 days. 3 days to what? To learn to look like you chose me. Avery looked at the ring on her hand, at the signature she'd just written, at the window and the desert beyond it, vast and dry and indifferent. I didn't, she said. No, he agreed, but you're here. The silence that followed was the first one that felt, in some small and complicated way, like they were on the same side of something. She wasn't sure that made her feel better. The 3 days moved fast. Roman did not hover. He gave her the house, or the relevant parts of it, and a daily schedule, and the name of a woman named Claire who served as a kind of household coordinator, and who appeared at Avery's door each morning with a warm expression and a tablet containing the day's logistics. Claire was efficient, tactful, and clearly expert at managing people who were navigating unusual circumstances without making them feel managed. On the first day, Avery explored. The mansion was large without being obscene. 4 bedrooms, a library, a gym, a formal dining room that connected to a chef's kitchen, an infinity pool that backed up to a view of the valley. Her room was the one she'd woken up in. Roman's was across the hall and further down, a detail she'd confirmed by quietly checking. Separate bathrooms, separate spaces. The contract's terms made physical in the architecture of the house. On the second day, Roman sat with her for 3 hours and they went through the family. Dominic DeLuca, 71, dying of pancreatic cancer, still running the company from a wheelchair when he felt strong enough, sharp as broken glass. He had married Roman's mother young and buried her when Roman was 9. He had built DeLuca Holdings from a real estate operation in New Jersey into something that spanned 4 states and several continents, and he was the kind of man who considered his legacy as seriously as other men considered their health. Marco DeLuca, 36, 4 years older than Roman, who had expected to inherit the company and had been passed over in their father's succession, planning for reasons that Roman stated briefly and without elaboration. There were cousins, associates, a woman named Elena, who had been Dominic's personal assistant for 15 years, and who was, Roman said, smarter and more observant than anyone in any room she entered. "What about you?" Avery said, midway through the second afternoon, sitting across from him in the library with a legal pad full of notes in front of her. "What do I need to know about you, the version that your father believes?" Roman looked at the question for a moment. "He believes I worked too hard, that I inherited his mind but not his patience, that I was shaped by my mother's death in ways I haven't fully accounted for, that I should have married years ago." A pause. "He'll believe I married you impulsively because of the Vegas trip. He knows I was there for a business meeting. And he'll believe I was drawn to someone real, someone outside the world he built. He's been hoping for that, someone not from the industry." "Is any of that true?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "More than I expected," he said. She didn't press it. On the third day, Claire came with garment bags. "Mr. DeLuca would like to provide appropriate clothing for the dinner," Claire said, which was a tactful way of saying that Avery's existing wardrobe, packed for a bachelorette weekend, was not going to survive Friday night. The bags held 3 options for the evening, all of them understated and perfect in the way that truly expensive things were understated and perfect. Avery picked the navy one, which fit like it had been measured, which she suspected it had been. She stood in front of the mirror in the navy dress, and her own reflection looked back at her, composed, presentable, the diamond on her finger catching the light. And for a moment she almost convinced herself. Almost. Friday arrived like a verdict. Dominic DeLuca arrived at 6:15 in a black car that Avery watched from an upstairs window. He was helped from the car by 2 men, not because he was frail. He moved with a deliberate strength that illness had bent but not broken, but because he used a cane now, which he carried with the irritated dignity of a man who had recently been forced to acknowledge his own body's limits. I was tall, like Roman. White-haired, thick through the shoulders, dressed in a suit that was impeccably dark. His face was the origin point for Roman's, the same strong jaw, the same quality of fixed attention, just weathered and marked by 7 decades and whatever that 7 decades had contained. Marco was with him. The brother was broader than Roman, built differently, with none of Roman's stillness. He moved restlessly, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes moving around the entrance hall as they came in, cataloging. He was handsome in a more obvious way, the kind of face that had probably been useful in rooms full of people who underestimated it. His eyes found Avery immediately. She was standing at the base of the main staircase beside Roman, and she felt Marco DeLuca's gaze land on her the way you feel weather changing. A drop in pressure, something anticipating. Roman's hand found the small of her back. The touch was light, professional, practiced, and warm. She hadn't expected warm. "Avery," Roman said. "My father, Dominic. My brother, Marco." Dominic crossed to her with deliberate steps and took her hand in both of his. His grip was still strong. He looked at her. Not quickly, not dismissively, but with the thoroughness of a man who had spent a lifetime reading people and was now applying that skill with the urgency of someone who had limited time to spend it. "So you're the woman," he said. "I'm one of them," she said. Something moved in his eyes. "Roman told me you were direct." "I don't have the energy not to be." Dominic held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he said, still looking at her, "She'll do." Marco made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite dismissal, but contained elements of both. Dinner was 3 hours long. Avery survived it the way you survive an exam you've studied for but can't fully prepare for. By being present, by listening, by asking the right questions, and answering the ones she could, and deflecting the ones she couldn't with the particular skill of someone who had spent years managing a classroom of people testing her authority. Dominic asked about her teaching, her family, where she'd grown up, how she'd met Roman. She had the story. They'd worked it out. But she didn't recite it. She talked around it, which was more convincing. Marco was quiet for most of the meal, watching. When he finally spoke to her directly, it was over dessert, and his voice carried a pleasantness that didn't reach his eyes. Roman never brought anyone home before, he said. Not once, in 40 years of dinners. 32 years, Roman said. I wasn't attending family dinners before I was born. You know what I mean, Marco looked at Avery. It's unusual. I imagine it is, she said. How long have you two been together? Before Vegas? She felt Roman's leg press briefly against hers under the table. Confirmation, steadiness. She'd expected tension. She got something else. Not long, she said, but sometimes long isn't the point. Marco smiled. It was a careful smile. That's romantic, he said. Very romantic. The words sat in his mouth like something he was tasting for poison. After Dominic and Marco left, Dominic embracing Roman for a long moment near the door, whispering something in his ear that Roman received without expression. The house went quiet. Avery kicked off her heels in the entrance hall and stood in her stockinged feet on the cool floor and let out a breath that she'd been holding, it seemed, for about 3 hours. Roman was still at the door. He turned and looked at her. You were good, he said. I was terrified. You were good, he repeated. My father likes you. Your brother doesn't. Marco doesn't like anyone. He doesn't like me. He came back down the hall toward her, loosening his tie. You handled the dinner question well. I deflected the dinner question. That's handling it. He stopped a few feet from her. In the entrance hall's softer lighting, with the tie loosened and the evening done, he looked different than he did in the study. Less formal. Something slightly more exposed. What did your father say to you at the door? She said. He was quiet for a moment. He said she's real, Roman said. He said he was glad I finally... He stopped. He said he was glad. Avery looked at him. At the particular way he'd stopped mid-sentence. At the thing that moved briefly across his face before he locked it back down. She thought about what he'd said the night before. No one had been accurate about me in a long time. She thought about sad eyes. She thought about the fact that she was standing in a stranger's house in a dress that cost more than her laptop, wearing a ring that constituted legal marriage to a man she'd known for 48 hours, and that her mother was going to call eventually, and she was going to have to say something, and that in approximately 5 months and 3 weeks, she would sign divorce papers and walk away with enough money to change the course of her life. She thought about how none of that felt as simple as it had seemed when she was doing the math. Thank you, Roman said. For tonight. She nodded. She picked up her heels. She walked toward the staircase, and at the bottom of it she paused without fully knowing why. Your father, she said. Is he really dying? Yes, Roman said. Just that. No embellishment. She looked at him once more. In the light at the end of the hallway, standing alone in his own house with his tie half undone and his face held carefully neutral, he looked like exactly what he'd told her she'd said. A man with sad eyes. She went upstairs. She lay in the silk sheets of the enormous bed and stared at the expensive ceiling and turned the ring around her finger in the dark, round and round, the diamond and the band. In the morning, everything would be fine. She would be professional. She would be practical. She would execute the terms she'd signed and collect the money and leave in December, and her life would be different in the ways she'd planned. That was the arrangement. That was all this was. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from a number she didn't recognize, sent to the cell phone number she'd had for 3 years. We know about the Hart woman. Tell DeLuca she should go home before someone makes that choice for her. Avery stared at the screen. The diamond on her hand caught the light from the phone. The house was quiet. Outside, beyond the walls and the guards and the manicured hedges, the city blazed on, indifferent and endless. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she got up, walked down the hall, and knocked on Roman DeLuca's door. Well, Roman answered the door in 30 seconds. That was the first thing she clocked, the speed of it. Not the groggy delay of someone pulled from sleep. Not the shuffled hesitation of a man disoriented at being knocked on at whatever this hour was. 30 seconds, and the door opened, and he was standing there in a dark t-shirt and the same trousers he'd worn to dinner, minus the jacket, and his eyes were sharp and fully awake. He hadn't been sleeping. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw there made him step back immediately. "Come in." She came in. His room was larger than hers and less furnished, deliberately sparse, she thought, the way rooms look when the person living in them doesn't want too many things around them. A desk with a laptop open to something she couldn't read from this distance. A lamp on. A glass of water. He had been working, or something close to it. She held out her phone. He took it, read the message. His face did not change in any way that was readable, but something in his posture changed. A kind of settling, a consolidation, the way a structure shifts when a load is placed on it. He handed the phone back. "When did this come in?" 10 minutes ago." "Have you replied?" "No." He crossed to his desk and picked up his own phone. She watched him type a message, short, fast, not looking at the screen, the way someone texts who has done it in the dark many times. He made a call immediately after. 2 sentences, quiet, then he hung up. "My security team is already checking the number," he said. "It'll be a burner. They'll trace the tower if they can." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" "I don't know yet." She was still holding her phone. The screen had gone dark. "Who sent that?" "I don't know yet either." "But you have a guess." I was quiet for a moment. Not evasive. Choosing. "There are several people who would have an interest in destabilizing our arrangement. Tonight's dinner went well. My father's reaction was visible to anyone watching, and there are people who watch." He paused. "I said there were people on the board waiting for my father's death. Those people have reach." The text said to go home. She put her phone in the pocket of her robe. "That's a threat." "Yes. You told me I'd be protected. You said that specifically." "You will be. Roman." She said his name and it came out harder than she'd intended, but she didn't soften it. "Someone has my phone number, my personal number. I've had that number for 3 years, and I don't give it out freely. And I didn't give it to anyone in this city except Dana and the lawyer. Someone got it, which means someone did research, which means someone was watching before tonight, before the dinner." She watched his face. "Did you know this was a possibility when you made the offer?" He met her eyes. "Yes." "Did you disclose that in the contract?" A beat. "Not explicitly." "Not explicitly." She heard her own voice go flat. "So when you said I'd be protected, when you said there were limits and you'd hold up your end, you knew I might need protection from the moment I agreed, and you presented it as a theoretical rather than a current and active situation. I didn't know how active it would become, or how quickly." "That's not an answer. It's the honest one." She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp on his desk cast the room in a warm, low light, and it threw shadows across the side of his face, and he stood in it and didn't try to manage her reaction, didn't offer words faster than they were ready. She'd already noticed that about him. He didn't fill silence with noise. Most people did. Most people, when they'd done something they could be accused of, started talking faster. Roman didn't talk faster. She wasn't sure if that was integrity or just a different variety of calculation. "I'm not leaving," she said. He didn't look surprised. "All right. I'm not leaving because I signed the contract and because the money is real, and because whoever sent that message can go to hell. But I want the full picture from here. Not managed information. Not what you decide I need to know when you decide I need to know it." She crossed her arms. "If something is relevant to my safety, I hear it first. Not after the fact. Not softened. First." "Agreed." "That's it? Just agreed?" "What else do you want me to say?" "I want you to understand that I'm not a prop in your story," she said. "I know that's what the contract is. I know what I am in this arrangement. But I'm a person inside the contract, and if I'm going to be in danger because of this, I deserve to know the terrain." Something changed in his face. Not softening exactly, more like recognition. "You're right," he said. "You deserve to know before you signed." "Yes, I did. I made a calculation that you wouldn't agree if I told you the full scope up front. So you withheld it." "Yes." She waited for the apology. It didn't come. He held her gaze and said nothing further and didn't dress it up and didn't reach for language to make it less than what it was. She found, unexpectedly, that the absence of the apology bothered her less than the apology would have. "Go to sleep," he said. "My team will have someone on your door tonight. In the morning, we'll go through the situation properly. I'll tell you what I know." She turned for the door. "Avery." She stopped. "I don't think you're a prop," he said. "I want to be clear about that." She left without answering. So, the morning came gray and warm, the desert sky pulling cloud cover in from the west, and Avery was awake before 6 because she'd slept in pieces, waking every hour to a house that was quiet and intact around her while her mind ran laps. She showered, dressed in her own clothes, jeans, a plain white shirt, things that were hers, and was downstairs before Roman. The man posted outside her door overnight had been unobtrusive to the point of near invisibility, a quality she suspected was trained. I was gone by morning, replaced by the normalcy of Claire in the kitchen, and coffee already made, and the newspaper that Roman apparently still received in print laid on the counter. She was on her second cup when he came down. He looked like he'd slept 4 hours, which she guessed was probably normal. He poured coffee, sat across from her at the kitchen island, and without preamble said, "Marcus Venn." "Who is that?" "Board member, second largest individual shareholder outside my father's stake. He's been building a coalition on the board for the last 14 months, waiting. When my father dies and the succession question opens, he intends to move for external management, a CEO appointment from outside the family. It dissolves the DeLuca holding structure and opens the company to acquisition within 3 years. The assets get parceled, and he and the other coalition members come out with significant gains. And if you control the family stake when your father dies, he can't do it. He needs either a divided family or no family representative. A married, stable successor with a united front shuts the door." He drank his coffee. "He has resources, and he's not patient. He would have people watching my father's condition. He would have known about Vegas. I was there for a meeting that included 2 of his associates. He moved fast." The text came from Venn, almost certainly from someone working for him. He wouldn't do it personally. Avery turned her cup in her hands. "What can he actually do to me?" Roman's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Pressure, investigation, trying to find cracks in the story. He might approach you directly. He might approach people close to you, your friend Dana, your family." "My mother?" "Possibly." She set the cup down. "If anyone approaches my mother, I'll put protection on her today." She looked up at him. He said it simply, like it was already decided, like the outcome of if was never in question. "She doesn't know I'm here," Avery said. "She doesn't know about any of this. I've been putting off calling her because I don't know what to say. You'll need to tell her something, a version of something. People who care about you are vulnerabilities if they're uninformed. They react unpredictably when approached. My mother is not a vulnerability. To someone with Venn's resources, everyone is a vulnerability." He said it without cruelty, just plainly. "I'm not trying to alarm you. I'm telling you what I told you I'd tell you." She absorbed that. "All right," she said after a moment. "I'll call her today." But she called her mother from the garden, standing near the pool in the gray morning warmth, watching the water move slightly in the desert breeze. Her mother picked up with the particular energy of someone who had been waiting. "Avery Marie." "Hi, Mom. I have 17 missed calls from your number and then nothing, and Dana called me." "Dana called you?" "She was worried. She said you were in some kind of situation. She didn't say what kind, and I have been—" A breath. Her mother, contained in a way that Avery recognized as the controlled version of significantly not contained. "Tell me what's happening." Avery looked at the pool, the smooth blue surface, the way the light came through the clouds and lay across it without conviction. She told her mother a version of the truth. Not the contract, not the money. Those pieces she couldn't explain in a way that wouldn't end in an argument she wasn't prepared to have. But the marriage, the drunken ceremony, the reality of it, the ring on her finger, those she told. She told her mother she was staying in Las Vegas for a while, that she'd met someone, that it was complicated and she was handling it and she needed her mother to not worry. Her mother was quiet through most of it. When Avery finished, the silence stretched long enough that she checked the phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Mom, I'm here." A pause. "This man, Roman." "Yes." You're safe? You feel safe?" Avery looked back at the house. Through the glass doors of the study, she could see Roman at his desk, on the phone, his back to her. The way he sat, the stillness of him. "I feel safe," she said. It came out more certain than she'd expected. Her mother made a sound that was not quite satisfied but not quite alarmed. "I want to meet him." "I know. Not a video call, actually meet him." "Okay, Mom." And Avery, another pause. Her mother had a way of loading pauses that Avery had inherited, which she only recognized because other people had pointed it out to her. You sound different. I had a long week. No, different. A beat. Be careful. I will. Not just with the situation, with yourself. She hung up. Marco DeLuca arrived unannounced at 11 in the morning, which Avery clocked as intentional the moment she saw his car pull up the drive. No call ahead, no coordination with Claire, just the black car and Marco stepping out of it with his jacket open and his hands loose at his sides, wearing the particular ease of a man who considered this property to be, in some fundamental sense, also his. Roman was still on a call in the study. Avery was in the library with a book she wasn't actually reading when Claire found her with an expression of careful neutrality. Mr. DeLuca's brother is here, Claire said. He asked for Roman, but Roman is occupied. He's also asked to speak with you. Avery set the book down. She found Marco in the front sitting room, standing rather than sitting, hands in his pockets, looking at a painting on the wall with the expression of a man who had looked at it many times and was not looking at it now. He turned when she came in. The smile was immediate and easy and false. Avery, he said, like they were old friends. Marco. She stayed near the doorway. Not defensive, just calibrated. Roman's on a call. I know, I can wait. He gestured at the chair nearest him, like it was his room. Sit with me. She came in, but she didn't sit. She stood near the window, which gave her the light at her back and his face in it. He looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite amusement. You don't trust me, he said. I don't know you. Same thing, in my family. He sat himself, crossed an ankle over his knee, relaxed. Last night went well. Pop liked you. I'm glad. You handled his questions well. The Vegas story was smooth. It wasn't a story. His eyes held on her. No? We met in Vegas. We got married in Vegas. Those are facts. In a single night. It happens. To people who don't plan it. He tilted his head slightly. Roman plans everything, down to the texture. He has since he was a kid. He never did anything impulsive in his life except... He stopped. Let the pause do the work. Well, except you. Avery held his gaze. Said nothing. I'm just trying to understand my brother, Marco said. The easy tone had a floor under it. She could feel the floor. He kept you completely private, didn't mention you to anyone. And then suddenly, Vegas, a ring, brings you home to dinner. It's a lot of change very fast. Love can be fast. Love. He said the word like he was trying it on. You love him. I married him. People marry for a lot of reasons. Yes, she said. They do. The pause between them had texture now. Marco was smart. She'd clocked that at dinner, and she was confirming it now. He was working through something, testing angles. Not because he was aggressive, but because he was genuinely trying to determine what she was. Here's my position, he said, dropping the ease somewhat, getting closer to whatever was underneath it. My father is dying. He has probably 6 months. He's worked his entire life to build something, and he's at the end of it. And what happens to that thing matters. It matters to me. It matters to the people whose lives are wrapped up in it. He uncrossed his legs, leaned forward. Roman is going to inherit something that I spent 20 years also helping to build. I'm fine with that, or I've made my peace with it. But I need to know that the people around him are there because they belong, not because they're convenient. What would convince you? She said. Time, he said. Consistency. The long game. He looked at her steadily. You've known my brother, by your own account, for a matter of weeks. You don't know what the long game looks like in this family. Then tell me. He blinked, just slightly. She'd caught him off balance, and they both knew it. What? He said. Tell me what the long game looks like. If you want me to understand the family, help me understand it. I'm not going to learn it by being tested. She held his gaze. I'm a teacher. I know the difference between someone who's assessing and someone who's just trying to establish dominance. You're doing both, but the second one isn't necessary. Marco looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face. It wasn't warmth, but it was a different quality of attention. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone softer. I teach 10th graders in Sacramento, she said. Soft doesn't survive that. The corner of his mouth moved, almost. My brother, Marco said, and now his voice had changed, quieter and more complicated. When our mother died, he went very quiet. He was 9. He just stopped talking for a while. And then, when he started again, he was different, careful. He put everything behind glass where you could see it but couldn't touch it. He looked at his hands. He's been behind glass ever since, with everyone. He looked back up at her. I'm watching to see if you're actually touching something or if this is all still just glass. She didn't have an answer for that. Before she could find one, she heard Roman's footsteps in the hall. And then he was in the doorway, taking in the scene, Avery by the window, Marco in the chair, the particular atmosphere of a conversation that had gone somewhere real. His eyes went to her first. A check, quick, involuntary. Then to Marco. You should have called, he said to his brother. You would have prepared a version of yourself, Marco said simply. Roman came into the room. The quality of the air changed when he entered it, a pressure, a directionality. Avery had noticed this before, the way rooms responded to him without his seeming to require it. What do you need? Roman said. I need you to be straight with me about Ven. The name landed in the room. Roman didn't react visibly, but Avery saw his hand at his side close slightly. A small thing. She was becoming fluent in small things. What about him? Roman said. He called me last night, after the dinner. Marco stood. He told me that you've been overstating Pop's condition to accelerate the succession timeline, that you've been managing Pop's medical team to keep him compliant, and that the diagnosis is real, but the time frame is being manipulated. Avery watched Roman's face. That's a lie, Roman said. I know it might be. I also know Ven doesn't lie without a reason, and his reason right now is to split us. Marco's voice was careful now, genuinely careful. I'm telling you what he said so you know he's moving, not because I believe him. You believe part of it. I believe... Marco stopped, ran a hand through his hair, and for just a moment he looked like someone who was tired, deeply tired, in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. I believe that you would do whatever you thought was necessary to protect what Pop built, and that sometimes the distance between protecting and controlling is thinner than you think. The silence was heavy and had history in it, years of it. The kind of silence that exists between people who have had the same argument so many times, it stopped needing words. I am not managing Pop's medical team, Roman said. His prognosis is what his doctors say it is. If you want to verify that independently, do it. I'll give you the name of every physician. I don't need to verify it. Then why are you here? Marco looked at him. Because Ven is going to come at you hard, and when he does, he's going to try to use me to do it. I wanted you to know that I'm not going to be used. He glanced at Avery once, briefly, something in it that was neither hostile nor warm, but acknowledged. Then back to Roman. Watch your back, he said. He's not working alone. He left. The house settled around them again. Outside, his car started and moved down the drive. Avery looked at Roman. Not working alone, she said. No. He said it quietly, looking at the empty doorway. He has someone inside. Inside this house? Inside the company. Someone close to me. He turned. His face was closed in a way it hadn't been before Marco arrived. I've suspected it for 2 months. I haven't been able to confirm. So while you've been managing this whole situation, the dinner, the arrangement, making sure everything looked right, there was already someone feeding information out. Yes. She absorbed that. The room felt different, smaller. The morning's gray light through the windows was less benign now. Your security team, she said. The people on the property. Can you trust them? The person team, yes. The broader staff. I'm less certain. She thought about the text on her phone last night. The speed of it, dinner ended, and within 2 hours someone had reached her private number. Someone at the dinner, she said. Roman looked at her, and she saw it in his face. He'd already thought of this, was already there, had arrived there at some point in his sleepless night, and was now watching her arrive alongside him. The house staff, he said. Elena. Your father's assistant was here last night? She coordinated the dinner details with Claire. She wasn't present for the meal, but she was in the house. Avery thought about Elena. The 15 years, the smartest person in any room. You think she's working for Ven? I think it's possible. He crossed to the window, looked out. If she is, then everything my father has said to her for 15 years has been filtered. Every decision, every communication, every indication of his thinking on the succession. He paused. It would explain a great deal. Can you confront her? Not without proof. If I move on her without proof and I'm wrong, I damage my father's trust irreparably, and Ven wins that round anyway. He turned. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the strain underneath it now, thin and real. I need to be certain before I do anything. How long will that take? I don't know. And while you're trying to be certain, Ven is moving. Yes. They stood in the sitting room in the gray light and the weight of it. The painting Marco had been looking at was a landscape. Mountains, dark water, the suggestion of a coming storm in the brushwork. She hadn't noticed it before. Roman, she said. He looked at her. This is more than dinner parties, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. It is. She nodded, slowly. The thing settling in her that needed to settle. The full weight understanding of where she was. Not the contracted version, not the careful version, the real version. Okay, she said. He looked at her with something that might have been gratitude if he'd been a different kind of person, or she'd been a different kind of situation. Instead, it was just steadiness, mutual. Okay, he echoed. Wow. The next 8 days moved differently than the first 3. She learned the house in a new way, not as a guest cataloging luxuries, but as someone who understood that the space had sightlines and blind spots and that both mattered. She noticed which staff members made eye contact and which ones didn't. She noticed the car that parked on the road outside the property for 90 minutes on Tuesday morning and was gone before Roman's security team could run the plates. She noticed that Roman ate breakfast early and worked late, and that the hours in between had a different quality. Less guarded, more present, showing in small ways that she was accumulating without trying to. He read. That surprised her, even though there had been the bookshelves. He read at the kitchen island at night, after she thought he was working, actual books with broken spines, the kind of reading that was habitual and necessary rather than performative. She caught him once with a novel she recognized. She'd taught it to juniors, had a worn copy in her apartment in Sacramento, and the surprise on his face when she named it was the first genuinely unguarded thing she'd seen from him. You know it, he said. I've taught it 4 times. He looked at her for a moment, something recalibrating in him. What part are you at? The part where she makes the decision she can't take back. A pause. That's the whole book, he said. She'd laughed. She hadn't expected to laugh. They had dinner together 3 times that week without it being planned or required by the contract. Not formal dinners. Whatever was made or ordered, eaten at the kitchen island or the small table in the back room that looked over the garden. He was a different person eating informally. Less architecture, less management. He asked about her students, specific ones she'd mentioned, and remembered the details when she brought them up again. She found herself talking more than she meant to, being more honest than was strictly necessary. She told herself it was familiarity, proximity, the natural consequence of living in the same house. She told herself that more than once. On Thursday, Dominic called. He asked to see her alone, not Roman, specifically her. And the call lasted 40 minutes, mostly him asking questions about her childhood, her mother, why she became a teacher. The questions of a man mapping a person carefully. At the end, he said, Roman hasn't been happy in a long time. I need you to know that I can see the difference. She didn't know what to say to that. Okay, she said. That's all, he said. I just wanted you to know I can see it. He hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand and the afternoon light falling through the window of the room she'd started thinking of as hers, and she felt the contract thinning in some way she couldn't measure or account for. The call from Dana came on Friday afternoon. Someone came to my apartment, Dana said. Her voice was the controlled version of not controlled, which on Dana meant serious. Avery went cold. What? This morning, 2 men. They said they were doing background research for a business matter involving Roman D. Luca, and they had questions about you. How long we'd been friends, your financial situation, whether you'd ever been in any legal trouble. A pause. Avery? They knew things. They knew about your mom's hospital situation. They knew the amount you owe on your loans. They knew things that aren't public. Did you let them in? No. I spoke to them through the door for about 2 minutes, and then I told them to leave. They left. A beat. I called the number they gave me afterward, and it was disconnected. Avery was already moving down the hall toward Roman's study. Are you okay? I'm fine. I'm at work now. I'm fine. Dana's voice dropped. Avery, what is this? What is actually happening there? I'll explain everything tonight. Don't open your door to anyone you don't know. Don't. She pushed through the study door. Roman looked up immediately. She said to Dana, I'll call you in 1 hour, and hung up. Someone went to Dana's apartment, she said. This morning, 2 men, questions about me. They had private financial information. Roman was already on his feet, phone in his hand. Address? She gave him Dana's address in Sacramento. He was typing it before she finished. He made the call. Shorter than the ones she'd witnessed before, harder, the kind of conversation that contained an expectation of immediate compliance. Someone will be there within the hour, he said. Discreet. She won't see them unless something happens. This is what you meant about people close to me being vulnerabilities. Yes, you knew this was coming and you still didn't. She stopped herself, breathed. You protected her fast, faster than I expected. I told you I would. I know. She looked at him. I know you did. She pressed her hands flat against the desk, leaning slightly on them, feeling the solidity of it under her palms. Ven is escalating. He went to Dana to tell me something. He wanted me to know he can reach my people. Yes. He wants me scared enough to leave. Yes. Is he going to stop at Dana? Roman held her gaze. No, he said. He won't stop at Dana. She had known this. She'd known it since the text on the first night, since the conversation about vulnerabilities, since Marco's visit. She'd known the shape of it intellectually, but standing in Roman's study on a Friday afternoon with her hands on his desk and Dana's shaken voice still in her ear, the shape of it became something else. It became physical. Real in the body the way things become real when you understand them not just in the mind, but in the gut. She thought about the contract, the clean legal document with Patricia Ewan's notes in the margin, the neat installments, the termination clause that protected her. The contract looked very different from inside what it had started. I need to know something, she said. Ask. When this is over, when the 6 months end and your father is gone and the succession is settled and I walk away, she looked at him directly. Am I going to be safe after? He didn't answer immediately. The pause was small, but it was there. Roman. The situation will be resolved by then, he said. Ven will have no leverage and no reason. That's not what I asked. I will make sure you're safe, he said, before, during, and after. She looked at him, the desk between them, the controlled stillness of him, the held quality of his expression, and underneath it, if she was reading him correctly, if she was becoming fluent enough in the small things, something that was not calculated, something that was just true. She believed him. She didn't want to examine too closely why she believed him. She straightened up, ran a hand through her hair. I'm going to call Dana back, she said, and then I'm going to need you to tell me everything about Ven. Not the overview, everything. Tonight, he said. After dinner. She nodded, turned for the door. Behind her, Avery. She stopped. Thank you, he said, for not running. She stood in the doorway for a moment without turning around. Don't thank me yet, she said. She went to call Dana. She was halfway down the hall when her phone rang. Not Dana. Not her mother. A number she didn't recognize. Local Nevada area code. She answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, older, precise, unhurried. Ms. Hart, the voice said. My name is Elena Vasquez. I believe we need to talk. Privately. Before Roman finds out I've called you. A pause. There are things about this situation that Roman has not told you. Things that will determine whether you stay or whether staying gets someone killed. The hallway was empty around her. The house was quiet. I'm listening, Avery said. What? Avery didn't move from the hallway. She stood exactly where she'd stopped when the phone rang, her back to Roman's study, the house quiet around her, and she listened to Elena Vasquez's voice come through the receiver with the measured precision of someone who had rehearsed this call and then decided to abandon the rehearsal. How did you get this number? Avery said. The same way Ven's people got it, Elena said. I've been in this family's business for 15 years. I know how information moves. A pause. That's precisely why you should listen to me. Roman thinks you're working for Ven. A silence, shorter than she expected. I know what Roman thinks, Elena said. Roman is wrong about the conclusion, but not entirely wrong about the premise. That's what I need to explain to you. Her voice was steady, unhurried, the voice of someone with a great deal of practice at delivering difficult information to people who didn't want to receive it. Not on the phone. I need to see you in person, without Roman. I'm not meeting you alone. I'm not asking you to meet me in an alley, Ms. Hart. I'm asking you to come to Dominic's house. This afternoon. He's expecting you. Avery's grip tightened on the phone. Dominic asked you to call me. Dominic asked me to arrange it. A careful distinction. He needs to tell you something. He's been trying to find the right moment, and there isn't going to be a right moment, so he's making one. The voice shifted slightly. Not softer, but more direct, like a layer of professional distance dropped. He's running out of time, Ms. Hart, in more ways than one. Avery looked at the door of Roman's study at the end of the hall, the light under it, the sound of him, barely audible, on another call. If I tell Roman, he'll stop you from going, Elena said, and then you'll spend the rest of this arrangement building your understanding of this situation on a foundation that has a crack in it, one that will eventually give way under pressure. A pause. The choice is yours. I'm telling you the address. Whether you come is your decision. She gave the address. She hung up. Avery stood in the hall for a long moment. Then she went upstairs, changed into something that wasn't jeans, and came back down through the kitchen without going near the study. She told Claire she was going out, that she'd be back before dinner, and she took the car that had been made available to her since the second day. Not a DeLuca car, not tracked on their system, a lease in her own name that Roman had arranged as part of her personal autonomy clause. And she drove to Dominic DeLuca's house. She told herself it was a rational decision. She told herself that the whole way there. Dominic's house was smaller than Roman's, which surprised her. Not modest. Nothing about this family was modest, but human-scaled. A single-story structure in a quiet neighborhood on the western edge of the city, surrounded by mature trees that softened the desert light. The kind of house that had been lived in long enough to have settled into itself. Elena met her at the door. In person, Elena Vasquez was exactly what Roman's description had implied, and more. Small, composed. A woman in her late 50s, whose face had been shaped by decades of careful observation into something that gave nothing away by accident. She looked at Avery with an assessment that was frank and thorough and completed in about 4 seconds. He's in the back, she said. He's been up since 5. It's a good day. He's clear. I need you to understand that what he tells you, he's telling you as himself, not as a sick man, not as someone confused by his condition. She held Avery's gaze. What he says to you today is what he has always meant. She led Avery through the house. Photographs on the walls, the accumulated weight of a life that had been enormous and was now mostly still. A younger Dominic in various contexts. Construction sites, boardrooms, charity galas, a single photo of him with a woman who had Roman's eyes and Marco's jaw, holding an infant. Avery looked at that one for only a moment. Dominic was in a sunroom at the back of the house, in a wheelchair today, rather than with the cane, positioned near the glass wall that looked out over a small garden. He was dressed, proper trousers, and a collared shirt, and when he turned at her footsteps, his eyes were exactly as Elena had promised, clear, fully present, sharp as anything. Sit, he said, not unkindly, just direct. She sat in the chair Elena placed near him. Elena withdrew to the doorway and stayed there, present but removed, her specific version of privacy. Dominic looked at Avery for a moment. Then he said, How much has Roman told you about why he needs this marriage to hold? The board, she said. The succession, Marcus Venn. That's the business answer. He nodded slowly. It's accurate. It's not complete. He folded his hands in his lap. The hands were still large, the hands of the man he'd been before the illness diminished him architecturally. Roman took something from Venn 4 years ago. Not money, not property. He paused. Venn had a man inside DeLuca Holdings for 11 years, a financial director. He was feeding information, redirecting small percentages of transactions, building a structure over a decade that would have eventually allowed Venn to demonstrate a controlling financial interest in 3 of our subsidiary companies. It was sophisticated, extremely patient work. He looked at her steadily. Roman found it. He dismantled it quietly, without going to law enforcement, because going to law enforcement would have meant exposing the parts of our operation that don't survive that kind of exposure. He handled it internally. What does handled mean? Avery said. Dominic held her gaze. The financial director left the company. He left the city. He is no longer a problem. He let that sit. Ven lost 11 years of work. He lost money. He lost leverage he had spent a great deal of effort building, and he knew it was Roman who found him, even though Roman never confronted him directly. A pause. Ven has been waiting 4 years to answer that. The succession is an opportunity, but it's not the only motive. She absorbed that. Roman didn't tell me any of this. Roman doesn't tell people things he believes will make them afraid. That's not his decision to make. No, Dominic agreed. It is not. He looked out at the garden for a moment. That is one of his most consistent failures. He protects people by withholding from them. He learned it young, from me, if I'm being accurate about it, and it is a habit that has cost him. He turned back. I'm telling you because you have a right to understand the weight of what you've walked into. This is not a board dispute. Ven wants to destroy what Roman built, what I built, and he wants to do it by destroying Roman personally. The marriage, you're a piece of that. He'll try to use you to get to Roman in ways that go beyond pressure tactics. Avery's hands were very still in her lap. She was concentrating on keeping them still. What ways? Before Dominic could answer, Elena moved, a small, sharp movement from the doorway. She'd looked at her phone, and now her face had changed in a way that communicated urgency without a single word. He needs to know, Elena said. To Avery, not to Dominic. Dominic looked at Elena with the expression of a man who had anticipated this moment and had hoped it would come later. Tell me what, Avery said. Elena came further into the room. She stood near Dominic's chair, her phone held at her side. Ven has something on Roman, she said. He's had it for 2 months. I know about it because Ven approached me 6 months ago and offered me a significant amount of money to verify it. She met Avery's eyes. I didn't take the money. I also didn't tell Roman, which is the part of this that requires explanation. Why didn't you tell him? Because I wasn't certain how Roman would respond, and if he responded wrongly, it would have given Ven exactly what he needed. She pulled a breath. Ven has documentation. Financial records showing that Roman moved a significant sum, $11 million, from a DeLuca subsidiary account into an offshore structure 14 months ago. On paper, it looks like misappropriation, embezzlement from his own father's company. The sunroom was very quiet. Was it? Avery said. No. Elena's voice was firm. It was a defensive move. Roman discovered that Ven's man, before he was removed, had already siphoned funds into that offshore structure in a way that would implicate Roman when it was eventually found. Roman moved the money again to freeze it, to prevent it from being used, intending to restore it cleanly after the succession was settled. She paused. But the documentation that exists only shows Roman's movement of the funds, not what preceded it, not the context. And in the hands of federal investigators, or in front of a board in open session, it looks like Roman stole from his father, Avery said. It would end the succession, Dominic said quietly. It would end the company. It would put Roman in front of a federal grand jury. Avery looked at Dominic, at the weight in his face, not illness weight, but the heavier kind. The kind that comes from knowledge carried too long. You knew, she said. I found out 3 weeks ago, he said. Elena came to me. He looked at his hands. I've known my son his entire life. I know that he did not steal from me. I know that what Elena describes is accurate. I've had my own people verify the original structure that Ven built. He paused. But I am a dying man with a compromised capacity to act. What I know and what I can prove in time are not the same thing. Avery stood up. She didn't mean to. Her body made the decision before her mind finished processing, and she was on her feet in the quiet sunroom with the desert garden beyond the glass, and the weight of what she'd just been told pressing down on her chest like something physical. Ven is going to use this, she said. He's going to wait until the right moment. And deploy it, Elena said. Yes. The question is when. Our assessment is that he's waiting for Dominic's condition to deteriorate to the point where Dominic's testimony in Roman's defense becomes legally challengeable. He wants Dominic unable to speak credibly before he moves. Avery looked at Dominic, at the man in the wheelchair who had an unspecified number of months and who was watching her with eyes that were clear and present and running out of time. Roman doesn't know you know this, she said. Roman doesn't know any of what I've just told you, Dominic said. He knows Ven has something. He doesn't know what. He's been trying to find it for 2 months. A pause. Elena kept it from him for reasons she's explained. I kept it from him because he stopped. Because I wanted to speak to you first. I needed to know who you were before I decided how to proceed. And now you know who I am. He looked at her steadily. I think I knew at dinner, he said, but I needed to be certain. She looked at Elena. Why are you telling me this instead of telling him yourself? Because telling Roman directly right now will make him act, Elena said. Roman's instinct when he's threatened is to move fast and hit hard. If he acts on this before we have the counter documentation in place, he gives Ven the trigger to deploy everything he has. She held Avery's gaze. You can manage how he receives this. You can be the thing between his instinct and the action. I can't do that. His father... She glanced at Dominic. His father's word will make him act. Yours might make him think first. That's a significant assumption about my influence. It's an observation, Elena said. I've watched Roman for 15 years. I've watched him with every person in his life. I know what his attention looks like when it's complete. She paused. I also know what I saw at that dinner. Avery didn't pursue that. She couldn't afford to pursue that right now. I need the documentation, she said. Everything you have. The original structure, the timeline, Ven's approach to you. All of it. I need to take it to Roman with the full picture already built, so that when he reacts, there's something concrete in front of him. Elena looked at Dominic. He nodded. I'll have it ready within the hour, Elena said. Well, she drove back to Roman's house with a folder on the passenger seat and her hand steady on the wheel and her mind doing the thing it did when a situation was too large to process whole, breaking it into pieces, working the pieces. The teacher's habit of taking the incomprehensible and finding the teachable parts. What she had. Ven had fabricated documentation that would destroy Roman. The counter-evidence existed but was not yet compiled into usable form. Dominic was dying, and his window to act credibly was narrowing. Roman didn't know the specific nature of the threat bearing down on him. What she had to do, tell him. In a way that got him thinking rather than swinging. What she understood now that she hadn't that morning. She was not a prop in a performance. She was not a contracted wife navigating social dinners. She was, whether the contract had specified it or not, inside something real. Something with consequences that ran past the 6-month term and the divorce papers and the money. She understood this with a clarity that was not comfortable. She pulled into the drive. Roman's car was there, the security team's vehicle. Normal. She gathered the folder and walked into the house and found him in the kitchen, not working, standing at the counter with a glass of water, looking at nothing. He turned when she came in, clocked the folder, clocked her face. Where did you go? He said. Dominic's house. The stillness that came over him was different from his usual stillness. This was the stillness of someone who has just understood something and is deciding in real time how to respond to it. Elena called you, he said. Not a question. Yes. I was going to tell you. You weren't, she said. Not harshly, just accurately. You were going to manage it, find the right moment, decide what I needed to know. She set the folder on the counter between them. I need you to not do that right now. I need you to look at this and tell me if it's what I think it is. He looked at the folder. He opened it. She watched his face while he read. She'd become fluent enough in him by now to read the small things, and the small things were telling. The slight tension that moved through his jaw, the way his breathing changed. Not faster, but more deliberate, controlled. The way breathing becomes when you are actively managing a physical response. His hands on the pages were flat and still. He read for 4 minutes. She counted without meaning to. When he looked up, his face was the flattest she'd seen it, the most closed. Behind it, she could sense something moving that hadn't been there before. A heat, constrained, like a fire behind glass. Who compiled this? He said. Elena. She's had it for 2 months. She didn't tell me. She told me why. I think her reasoning was sound. Her reasoning. His voice was very even. She had documentation that Ven is planning to use to put me in front of a federal investigation, and she made a strategic decision about timing. Roman. She said his name the way she'd said it before, directly, without softening it. I know you're angry. I know why. You can be angry after. Right now I need you to hear the part that matters. Ven hasn't moved yet. He's waiting for your father's condition to deteriorate enough that Dominic's testimony won't hold up. We have a window. Elena has the counter documentation being compiled now. The original structure that preceded your movement of the funds, the timeline of Ven's man inside the company, everything. She held his gaze. But the window closes when your father's condition changes, which means I move now. Which means you move carefully now, she said. Not the same thing. He looked at her for a long moment. You went there alone, he said, without telling me. Yes. If Ven had known you were there, he didn't. If he had, then something would have happened and we'd be dealing with that, she said. But he didn't, and I got information you needed, and I got it in a way that means you can receive it without your first response being to hit something. She didn't look away. I made a judgment call. You can be angry about it after we deal with Ven. The kitchen was very quiet. Roman set the folder down. He looked at it for a moment, then at the window, then back at her. The fire behind the glass hadn't gone anywhere, but it had changed quality. Less reactive, more directed. She watched him find the thing that he found when she'd seen him think under pressure. The stillness that was not absence but concentration. Focus assembling itself from the raw material of controlled fury. I need to call my attorney, he said. Yes, and I need to pull the original transaction records from the period when Ven's man was still inside. I have them. They're in a secure archive. I always knew I might need them. He paused. I need 2 days. You have them. He looked at her again, and the quality of it was different from the assessments she'd grown used to. The strategic readings, the measured determinations. This was something else, something more direct and less managed. Why did you go? He said. Not accusingly, genuinely. She thought about how to answer that. She looked at the folder on the counter and the ring on her finger and the kitchen of a house she'd been living in for less than 2 weeks, and she said the most honest thing she could find. Because you needed the information and you weren't going to get it from the people who had it, and because... She stopped. Because your father is running out of time, she said. And whatever this is, whatever I signed and whatever the terms say, I'm not going to stand in a hallway while his window closes. Roman was very still, then quietly, Thank you. She nodded. She moved to take the folder back, but his hand came down on it at the same moment, covering hers. Not grabbing, not holding, just landing there, the warmth of it, and neither of them moved for a moment. She pulled her hand back. He let her. 2 days, she said. 2 days, he confirmed. The 2 days lasted 36 hours. Roman worked through both nights. She knew because the light was on in the study when she went to sleep and on when she woke. She brought him coffee at 2 in the morning on the first night without being asked, and he accepted it without commenting on the hour or the gesture, which told her he'd been expecting her. They worked through the counter documentation together, her reading, organizing, flagging, applying the same systematic precision she used on curriculum planning to something considerably higher stakes. He talked through the legal architecture while she mapped it on paper, the two of them at opposite ends of the desk like people who had been working this way for years. She didn't think about what that felt like. There was no time. On the morning of the second day, Roman's attorney arrived. An hour after that, a second attorney. An hour after that, Avery's phone rang. It was Marco. There's a board meeting, Marco said. His voice was stripped of everything that wasn't urgency. Emergency session. Ven called it for tomorrow morning. Avery was in the hallway. She pushed the study door open. Roman looked up. Ven called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow, she said. Roman stood. He's moving. He's moving, Marco confirmed through the phone. He's not waiting for your father, Avery said, the understanding landing as she spoke it. He's not waiting because something changed. Something made him move early. She looked at Roman. He knows you're building the counter case. Someone told him. Roman's face went completely still. His eyes moved to the doorway, past her, to something beyond her that she didn't understand yet, and the quality of his stillness changed in a way that she felt before she processed. Something dropping in her stomach, a cold, falling sensation. Roman, she said. He crossed past her into the hallway. She followed. I went to the front door, opened it. One of the security team was there, and Roman spoke to him in a low voice that Avery couldn't fully hear, but she caught the name. One name, short. He turned back. Tell me, she said. My head of security has been feeding Ven updates for 6 weeks, he said. His voice was completely level. The level that was worse than anger. The man I trusted most on the property. He told Ven that we're building the defense case. He told him that we have the documentation. She stared at him. Which means Ven knows we can beat him at the board if he waits, she said. Which means he's not waiting. Roman's jaw was set hard. He's going to walk into that board meeting tomorrow and deploy everything he has before we can present the counter-evidence. He needs a 12-hour window. That's what he's bought himself. Avery felt the shape of it close around them. The folder on the study desk. The documentation that was close but not finished. The board meeting at 9 in the morning. The man who had been inside Roman's house, eating Roman's food, protecting Roman's property, feeding everything to the other side. "Can we finish the documentation tonight?" she said. "Some of it, not all." "What do we need that we don't have?" "The original records from Ven's man are in a physical archive at the company's main office," he said. "Not digitized. I didn't want them on any network he might have access to. I need someone to go there tonight and retrieve them." He paused. "My security team is compromised. I don't know the extent. I can't send anyone from the house." She looked at him. "I'll go," she said. "No." "Roman, no," he said, and the flatness in his voice had real heat under it now, the fire no longer entirely behind the glass. "That's not what this... You can't go. If Ven's people see you going to the archives tonight, they'll know exactly what you're doing, and they'll move even faster or they'll stop you." She held his gaze. "They're not watching me. They're trying to get rid of me. They're not treating me as a threat. That's an advantage, and we should use it." He looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing something she hadn't seen before. Something that wasn't the contained stillness, or the strategic focus, or even the occasional unguarded quality she'd glimpsed in quieter moments. This was harder to name. Something that looked almost like fear, except she didn't think fear was the right word for what Roman DeLuca experienced when a situation was beyond his control. Loss of control. That was closer. "I'll have someone with you," he said finally. "Not from the house team. Someone from outside, someone I trust completely." "Fine. And you stay on the phone with me the entire time." "Fine. And if anything, Roman." She put her hand on his arm. Brief, light, the way you touch someone to bring them back to the present moment. "I need you to let me do this." He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "Why are you doing this?" he said. The same question from the kitchen. A different weight to it now. She didn't have the same answer she'd had then. The answer she had now was sitting in her chest in a way she wasn't ready to look at directly. She took her hand back. "Get me the address," she said, "and the name of the person meeting me there." The DeLuca Holdings main office was a tower in the central business district, 32 floors of glass and steel that looked like every other tower in every other American city at 2 in the morning. Dark except for the cleaning crews on 3 floors, the security desk in the lobby staffed by a single guard, the archives in the basement on the opposite side of the building from the main entrance. The man Roman had sent was named Garrett. 40s, quiet, the particular compact efficiency of someone with a military background that had never entirely left his posture. He met her half a block away, handed her a key card without ceremony, and walked beside her with the specific casualness of someone who was performing casualness over a great deal of alertness. "Sub-basement," he said quietly. "Row 14. The files are labeled by year and transaction ID. Roman gave you the list." She had the list on her phone. She had Roman's voice in her earpiece, low and steady. She had the key card. She had the particular clarity of mind that came, she was discovering, from being in a genuinely dangerous situation, a sharpening, a narrowing, everything that wasn't immediately relevant going quiet. The lobby guard barely looked up. The elevator to the sub-basement required the key card. The archive room was cold and smelled like old paper, and the specific must of documents that had been sealed for a long time. She found row 14. She found the files. She was 3 files in, pulling what she needed, when she heard the elevator. Garrett's voice in her ear, quiet. "Someone's coming down." She pulled the files faster. The elevator sound was getting louder, not stopping on another floor, coming all the way down. "Avery," Roman's voice, sharp. "Get everything you have and move toward the emergency stairwell. Garrett knows where it is." "I need 2 more. Now, Avery." She grabbed what she had. Garrett was already at her elbow, and they moved toward the far wall, towards the stairwell door, and she heard the elevator open and then voices, 2 of them, male, not the register of security guards going about routine work. And the quality of those voices told her everything she needed to know. They hit the stairwell door. The emergency exit alarm should have triggered. It didn't. Garrett had done something to the alarm panel, she realized, sometime in the last 30 seconds, without her noticing. They went up. 2 flights. 3. Emerging into a service corridor on the ground floor, Garrett steering her by the arm, moving fast without running, and then out through a service exit into the alley behind the building and into the cold Las Vegas night air. She was breathing hard. The files were clutched against her chest. She could feel her heartbeat in her hands. Roman in her ear. "Are you clear?" "Clear," Garrett said. "Avery." "I'm here," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I have most of them, not all." A pause. "How much?" "Enough," Garrett said, looking at what she was holding. "It's enough." She stood in the alley with the files against her chest, and the cold night air on her face, and the city blazing indifferently above the roofline, and she understood with complete certainty that she had crossed something tonight that the contract did not cover. Whatever had brought her here, the money, the practicality, the neat installments, and the divorce papers waiting in December, that wasn't what was keeping her here anymore. She didn't know when that had changed. She knew it had. "Get her back," Roman said, in her earpiece. And the way he said it, the specific way, the texture of it, she heard something that she did not want to examine too closely. Not tonight, not in this alley with the files in her arms and the adrenaline still moving through her blood. She followed Garrett back to the car. Tomorrow morning, Ven would walk into a board meeting with documentation designed to destroy Roman DeLuca. Tomorrow morning, they would walk in with something to fight back with. Whether it was enough, whether the night's work and the hours remaining between now and 9 a.m. were enough to close the gap. She didn't know. She knew she was going to find out. And she knew, with the particular clarity of someone who had just run through a darkened archive being hunted, that she was no longer running the calculation she'd been running when she signed the contract. The calculation had changed. She just hadn't decided yet what to do about that. They worked through the night. Roman's attorney, a sharp, sparse woman named Caldwell, who arrived at the house at 3 in the morning without complaint, as though being called at 3 in the morning was simply part of the terms she'd agreed to when she took Roman DeLuca as a client, spread the retrieved files across the dining room table alongside the documentation Elena had compiled, and began building the countercase with the focused, unsentimental efficiency of someone assembling a weapon. Avery worked beside her. Not as a lawyer, she had no illusions about that, but as what she actually was, someone who could read a complex document fast, identify the structural logic of an argument, find the gaps and the inconsistencies and the places where the narrative didn't hold. She'd spent 6 years teaching students to do exactly that with texts. This was a text. A dangerous one, with consequences she could feel in her sternum, but a text. Roman was on the phone continuously. She caught pieces of it, short, precise exchanges, names she didn't recognize, the specific cadence of a man calling in obligations. Not favors. Obligations. There was a distinction in the way he spoke that she was learning to read. Marco arrived at 4:30. He came through the door with the energy of someone who had been awake and moving for hours, and he looked at the dining room table and at Roman and at Avery, and he said nothing for a moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down. "Tell me what you need," he said to Roman. Roman looked at his brother. Something passed between them. Not warm, not resolved, but functional. A decision made wordlessly. "Testimony," Roman said, "at the meeting. You were present for the original internal investigation when we identified Ven's man. You saw the transaction records before they were archived. Your statement on the timeline—" "I'll give it," Marco said. Before Roman finished, just, "I'll give it." Roman nodded. Avery watched this. The two of them. The particular texture of people who had history that was mostly difficult choosing, in a crisis, the thing underneath the difficulty. She went back to the documents. At 6:15 in the morning, Caldwell set down her pen and looked at the assembled case across the table. Roman stood at the other end of it. Avery was in a chair to the side, her third cup of coffee going cold beside her, the particular grayness of no sleep sitting behind her eyes. "Here's what we have," Caldwell said. She didn't soften it or build to it. The original transaction structure that Ven's man built inside DeLuca Holdings, documented, time-stamped, traceable. The comparison to Roman's subsequent movement of the funds, which shows clearly that Roman's action was responsive, not initiating. Marco's first-hand witness statement on the internal investigation. Elena's account of Ven's approach to her 6 months ago, with date, location, and specific language used, That's attempted corruption of a company officer, which is its own weapon. She paused. What we don't have is a clean chain of custody on the original Venn documents. 2 of the files you retrieved last night are partial. The transaction IDs are there, but 2 supporting ledger pages are missing. How much does that matter? Roman said. It creates a gap. Not fatal, but exploitable. A good attorney, and Venn will have a good attorney, will spend time in that gap. She looked at him steadily. We can win this. I want to be clear about that. What we have is strong, but it won't be clean. It's going to be a fight. I know how to fight, Roman said. The board doesn't always reward fighting, Caldwell said. Some of them want quiet. Some of them will look at the mess and decide that the simplest path is to let Venn's motion pass, because resolving it is easier than contesting it. She paused. The swing votes are Hara, Brennan, and the Chen family block. I need to know if you have relationships with any of them. Hara, yes, Roman said. Brennan, he paused. Brennan was my father's appointment. He's loyal to the DeLuca name, but he's old and he doesn't like conflict. Then Dominic needs to be in that room, Caldwell said. The quiet that followed had weight. He's not strong enough for a board meeting, Roman said. He doesn't need to be strong. He needs to be present. Caldwell closed her folder. A dying man in a wheelchair, still fighting for what he built. That means something to men like Brennan. It means something to the Chen block, too. You can win this on paper and still lose it in the room. You need Dominic. Roman was quiet. Avery said, He'll want to be there. Roman looked at her. I spoke to him yesterday, she said. He knows what's at stake. If you give him the choice, he'll come. She held Roman's gaze. Give him the choice. Roman picked up his phone. The call to Dominic was short. She heard Roman's side of it from the hallway. The specific quietness of a son asking his father something he didn't want to ask, the way the professional architecture in Roman's voice thinned when he was talking to the man who'd built him. She heard him say, I need you there, and she heard the pause that followed, and then she heard him say thank you with the same quiet weight he'd used with her. She went to get dressed. The navy dress was clean. She put it on because it was what she had that was appropriate, and because she'd worn it to the dinner where Dominic had decided she was real, and she understood enough about symbolism by now to know when it was useful. She looked at herself in the mirror. The ring caught the early light, dark circles under her eyes. A woman who had been awake for most of the night, running through a corporate archive and building a legal defense and drinking bad coffee, and was now preparing to walk into a boardroom where the outcome would determine the future of a man she had not planned to care about. She looked at herself for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag and went downstairs. The DeLuca Holdings boardroom occupied the top floor of the tower. The same tower, different entrance from last night, and in the sharp morning light it looked nothing like it had in the dark. Glass and clean lines and the particular impersonal authority of corporate space designed to make everyone inside it feel that the decisions made here had a specific gravity. They arrived at 8:45. Roman, Avery, Caldwell, Marco. Elena was already there. She'd come directly from arranging Dominic's transport. The room was filling, board members arriving in ones and twos, the specific energy of people who had been told a meeting was urgent and had spent the intervening hours forming hypotheses. Venn was already seated. Avery saw him clearly for the first time. Medium height, late 60s, the kind of face that had been handsome once and had aged into something that looked like authority but was actually closer to endurance. He was dressed impeccably, and he sat with the stillness of someone who had been waiting a long time and had become expert at it. When Roman entered, Venn looked at him with an expression that contained no hostility and no warmth. Pure assessment, the way you look at a problem you've been solving for 4 years and are about to resolve. His eyes moved to Avery, lingered, something in them that she read as recalibration. He hadn't expected her to be there, or he hadn't expected her to look the way she looked, present, steady, not the frightened woman who was supposed to have gone home by now. She held his gaze for 2 seconds and then looked away, deliberately, letting him draw whatever conclusion he wanted from the fact that she wasn't afraid of him. Roman put his hand at the small of her back as they moved to their seats. Not performance, or not entirely. She felt his fingers press, very slightly, and she understood it as acknowledgement. She was here. He knew she was here. She sat down. Dominic arrived at 8:58. Elena wheeled him in, and the room changed when he entered it. The way rooms change when a force of nature arrives. A redirection of attention, a realignment of the space's gravity. He was in the wheelchair and his color was not good, and his body showed the erosion of the illness. But his face was entirely his. His eyes swept the room with a speed and precision that had nothing diminished in them, cataloging, assessing, landing on each person long enough to let them know they'd been seen. They landed on Ven. Ven's expression didn't change, but something happened in his posture, a micro-adjustment, almost imperceptible. Dominic moved past him without acknowledgement. Elena positioned him at the head of the table. The meeting was called to order. Ven's attorney was named Price, and he was exactly what Caldwell had said he would be. Good. He laid out the case against Roman methodically and without theatrics, which was more effective than theatrics. The documentation. The transaction records. The timeline that showed, in isolation, a DeLuca executive moving $11 million from a company account into an offshore structure with no board authorization, no disclosure, no traceable business purpose. He used words like fiduciary breach and misappropriation with the calm of someone reading a grocery list, and he watched the board members' faces while he said them with the focus of a man who had done this before and knew exactly which words landed where. Avery watched Brennan, old, white-haired, hands folded on the table, face carefully neutral. Hara was unreadable. The Chen block, two brothers in their 50s, exchanged a glance during the transaction timeline that she clocked without being able to interpret. Price finished. He sat down. Caldwell stood. She was quieter than Price and more precise, and she built the counter case the way Avery had watched her build it overnight, structurally, starting from the foundation. The original transaction architecture, the internal investigation, the timeline that preceded Roman's movement of the funds. Marco's testimony, which he gave briefly and without embellishment, looking at the board members rather than at his notes. Elena's account of Ven's direct approach. Attempted corruption, stated flatly, with dates and specifics. Avery watched Ven while Caldwell spoke. His expression was controlled. His attorney whispered something to him at the point where Elena's testimony was introduced, and Ven's hand on the table moved, a small thing, his fingers pressed against the surface and then released. He hadn't known Elena was going to testify. Caldwell reached the gap. The missing ledger pages. She addressed it directly rather than avoiding it, a better strategy. Avery had argued at 4 a.m, because the gap was going to be found regardless, and addressing it yourself controlled the framing. She characterized it as an incompleteness in the available documentation that in no way altered the established timeline or diminished the substantive counter-evidence. Price was on his feet before she finished. The incomplete documentation goes to the heart of the defense's case. The documentation is incomplete because the original records were archived under physical security specifically to prevent their alteration or destruction, Caldwell said. She didn't raise her voice. A precaution that, given the events of last night, when two individuals were found accessing the archive after hours, appears to have been well-founded. The room shifted. Price went still. Last night, Caldwell continued, addressing the board rather than Ven's attorney, the DeLuca Holdings archive was accessed by individuals whose identification is currently being reviewed by building security and law enforcement. The nature of that access, combined with the timing of this emergency board meeting called less than 12 hours later, raises significant questions about the provenance of the documentation Mr. Ven's representatives have presented today. She paused. We are formally requesting that this board table any vote pending an independent verification of the chain of custody on all submitted documents. The room was very quiet. Ven said for the first time, "That's a delay tactic." "It's a legal request," Caldwell said, "which the board's own charter requires them to consider." Brennan spoke. His voice was old but still had iron in it. "Dominic." He looked at the head of the table. "You've heard both sides. What do you say?" The room turned. Dominic DeLuca had been still through all of it, present, watching, conserving what he had. Now he straightened in the chair. It cost him something physically. Avery saw it in the tightening around his eyes, quickly controlled. "I say that I built this company over 40 years, he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the room without effort, the acoustic confidence of a man who had spoken in this room more times than anyone else at the table. "I know every decision that has been made in it. I know my son. I know the man across this table." He looked at Ven with the specific quality of a man who has nothing left to perform. Marcus has been waiting for me to die since I got the diagnosis. I have no objection to that. It's rational. What I object to is that he decided to accelerate the process. He paused. This board has my full testimony in writing, filed with Caldwell this morning, on everything you've heard today. My testimony while I am still legally and mentally competent to give it. He looked at Brennan. You asked what I say. I say table the vote. Verify the documents. Let the truth take the time it needs. Brennan nodded. Once. Slowly. The vote to table was 6-3. Ven's face when the count was read was the first genuinely unguarded thing she'd seen from him. Not rage, something colder and more final. The expression of a man who has been patient for 4 years and has just watched his patience run out in the wrong direction. But the room cleared in the particular way rooms clear after a contested proceeding. Quickly, people not making eye contact, the energy of a fight that has stopped but not resolved leaking out into the hallway. Avery stood near the window while Roman spoke with Caldwell, watching the city through the glass, the mid-morning light hard and clear over the desert. She felt the adrenaline leaving her body in increments, the tiredness moving in behind it, enormous and specific. Her feet hurt. There was a tension behind her eyes that was going to become a headache within the hour. She watched Ven leave the room. At the door, he paused. He looked back. His eyes found Roman first, then moved to Avery. And the thing in them now was different from the recalibration she'd seen when they arrived. This was something more direct. An acknowledgement, not of defeat, of the specific nature of the obstacle. He looked at her for 2 seconds. Then he left. She didn't like those 2 seconds. Roman appeared at her shoulder. He was looking at the doorway Ven had just walked through. It's not over, she said. No. He said it flatly. Tabling the vote buys time. It doesn't resolve the documentation gap. It doesn't eliminate Ven's access to the board. We have, he exhaled, weeks, maybe, before he finds another angle. Then we close the gap in the documentation. The ledger pages are somewhere, she said. Ven's people went to that archive last night for a reason. If they were going to destroy the pages, they'd have done it before he filed the documentation, not after we were already building the counter case. She looked at Roman. They took them. Or they moved them, which means they exist. He was watching her. You think like this naturally, he said. The way you... He stopped. I've been doing it all night, she said. I'm tired. So am I. They stood together at the window for a moment. The city below, indifferent and bright. She was aware of him beside her, the specific warmth of proximity after 20-some hours of working alongside each other, the closeness that accrued without announcement. Your father, she said. Elena's taking him home. He's... Roman stopped. He pushed himself hard today. He'll need... He stopped again. She looked at him. The specific quality of his stillness right now was different from all the other versions she'd cataloged. Not management, not strategy. Something raw and held, the way grief is held when there isn't time for it yet. She didn't say anything. She didn't have words that would help. She just stayed where she was, which was beside him, and let that be what it was. After a moment, he said, Thank you for last night, for going to the archive. I got what we needed. You didn't have to... Roman, she said it gently. Stop thanking me for things I chose to do. He looked at her. The morning light was hard and clear, and it hit his face without the softening of the house's warm lamps. And she saw the tiredness in him. Real tiredness, not the managed version, the kind that gets into the lines around a person's eyes and makes them look like who they actually are. She thought about Dominic saying, Roman hasn't been happy in a long time. She thought about this contract, December, the divorce papers. She looked away. Marco appeared from across the room. He stopped a few feet away and looked between them with an expression that was not the calculated assessment of his first visit. Something quieter, more considered. It holds for now, he said to Roman. For now, Roman agreed. Marco looked at Avery. You were at that archive last night, he said. Not a question. Yes. I was quiet for a moment. Then, those files don't leave this building without someone noticing. Ven's people, they weren't just in the archive. They had copies made somewhere in the building. There's a secondary server room on the 14th floor that isn't on the official building manifest. He paused. I found out about it 6 months ago, and I didn't tell Roman because I wasn't sure whose side I was on yet. He held Roman's gaze. I'm telling you now. Roman looked at his brother for a long moment. 14. he said. 14, Marco confirmed. Roman turned to Avery, the particular directness of him when a decision had been made. The building's security sweep will be complete by 2 o'clock. After that, I know, she said. It's not the archive this time. If there's anything on that server, I know what it is, she met his eyes. I said, I know. Marco was watching both of them with the expression he'd had in the sitting room when he said, I'm watching to see if you're actually touching something, or if this is all still just glass. She felt his attention but didn't address it. 2 o'clock, she said to Roman. Where do you need me? He looked at her for a moment. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something changed in his face. Immediate, abrupt, a shift so sharp she felt it before she understood it. He picked up. He listened for 4 seconds. When he lowered the phone, his face was the flattest she'd seen it. Beyond the boardroom flat, beyond the night of the text flat. Something that had gone past control into a place that didn't need control, because everything else had gone very, very still. What? She said. My father, he said. He collapsed in the car. Marco made a sound, not a word. Something that came from somewhere before words. He's alive, Roman said quickly. He's en route to Desert Valley. Elena's with him. He was already moving toward the door. He pushed too hard today. Avery grabbed her bag and followed without being asked. Marco was already through the door ahead of them both, moving with a speed that stripped away everything that wasn't the essential thing, the same essential thing for both of them, the one thing beneath the company and the board and the years of difficult distance. The elevator took too long. Roman stood in it and stared at the descending numbers, and his hands at his sides were very still. And she stood beside him, and she thought about December and contracts and divorce papers, and she thought about the specific feeling of his hand covering hers on the folder in the kitchen, and she thought about Dominic saying, I can see the difference, and she thought about sad eyes and choosing, and the space between what you signed up for and what you're actually in. The elevator opened. They ran. On. Desert Valley Medical Center had the particular quality of all hospitals. A compression of time, a suspension of normal causality, the sense that the rules operating outside its doors were temporarily replaced by different ones. Dominic was in emergency stabilization when they arrived. Elena met them in the corridor outside. Composed in the way that people are composed when composing themselves is the only useful thing left to do. Cardiac event, she said. Not a major one. He's stable. They're assessing. She looked at Roman. He knew the risk of today. He made the choice. Roman nodded. His jaw was set. Marco sat in a plastic chair in the corridor and put his face in his hands. Just for a moment. Then he lifted it again, and his face was the face of his father's son, carrying the weight, not putting it down. Avery sat beside Marco. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, which was what the moment required. An hour passed. Then another. At the end of the second hour, a doctor came out and spoke to Roman in a low voice, and Roman listened and nodded, and the tension in his shoulders changed quality. Not released, resettled. He came back to where they were sitting. He's stable, he said, resting. They want to keep him overnight. He paused. He's asking for Avery. Marco looked up. Avery looked at Roman. Just you, Roman said. Something in his voice that she couldn't fully parse. Not jealousy, not possessiveness. Something more complicated. Something that might have been gratitude and grief, and something else woven together in a way she didn't have the language for yet. She went in. The room was small and white, and full of the quiet persistence of machines. Dominic was in the bed, diminished by the horizontal position and the hospital gown in a way he'd never seen diminished in a wheelchair or with a cane. But his eyes were open and clear, and when she came in, he looked at her with the same directness he'd had in the sunroom. She pulled a chair beside the bed and sat. You didn't have to come today, she said. Yes, I did. His voice was thinner than before, but still his. The board will sort itself, he said. That's not why I came. He looked at her steadily. I came because Roman needed to see me there, not for the votes. For him. A pause. He stopped asking me for things when he was about 12 years old. He decided he had to handle everything alone. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. I let him. I told myself it was strength. It was a failure. She didn't answer. He won't ask you to stay, Dominic said. When December comes, he'll hold the contract like a point of honor. He won't ask you for more than you agreed to. He turned his head and looked at her. I'm asking you not to wait for him to ask. She sat with that. You're a dying man asking me to make a permanent decision from inside a 2-week arrangement, she said. Not harshly, just accurately. Yes, he said. I am. A small, exhausted approximation of a smile. Do you think I have the patience for the long approach right now? She almost laughed. I know what I see, he said. I've been watching people my whole life. It's the one skill the illness hasn't touched. He closed his eyes briefly. Don't decide now, but don't let the contract decide for you either. She sat with him until he slept. When she came back into the corridor, Roman was standing at the window at the far end, looking out. Marco was on the phone nearby, voice low. The hallway had the long fluorescent stretch of all hospital hallways, the particular loneliness of them. She walked to Roman. He turned when he heard her. He's sleeping, she said. He's okay. Roman nodded. He looked back at the window. Outside, the desert afternoon was enormous and bright, the city spread out under it in the particular flat endlessness of Las Vegas, everything blazing and temporary at once. The server room, he said. On 14. I know. We need those records before Venn finds another way to deploy what he has. He turned. His face was tired, genuinely, deeply tired in the way that no amount of control could fully contain right now. The tiredness of a man who had been running at maximum for days, who had watched his father be wheeled into an emergency room an hour ago, who was still calculating the next move because stopping to not calculate was something he had trained himself out of entirely. She looked at him. She thought about what Dominic had said. He'll hold the contract like a point of honor. She thought about December. She thought about the ring. The stupid, real, expensive ring that had started all of this with a question she'd apparently asked a sober stranger at midnight in Las Vegas, and she thought about what he'd said when she asked him why he'd said yes. Because no one had been accurate about me in a long time. After we get the records, she said, after the documentation is complete and the gap is closed and Venn can't move anymore. She stopped, chose the next words carefully. We need to talk. He looked at her. About December. About a lot of things. He was quiet for a moment, then, after. After, she agreed. His phone rang again. He looked at the screen, Caldwell, this time, and answered it, and she watched his face change as he listened, the tiredness pulling back under the professional architecture, the machinery reassembling itself because the situation required it. She stood in the hospital corridor and watched him, and understood with complete and unambiguous clarity that she was in love with a man she'd accidentally married in Las Vegas 3 weeks ago, and that the worst possible time to realize this was in a hospital hallway 40 minutes before they were supposed to go retrieve evidence from an unauthorized server room in a building where people had already been sent to stop them once. She understood it, and she set it aside because there was no other option. Roman lowered the phone. Venn knows about the server room, he said. Caldwell got it from a source on the building's management team. He's sending people there tonight to wipe it. She looked at him. How long do we have? She said. 4 hours. Maybe 5. She nodded. Her bag was on her shoulder. Her feet still hurt. The headache had arrived on schedule behind her eyes, and the adrenaline was metabolizing unevenly, and she was running on no sleep and hospital coffee, and something that was not going to let her stop. Then we need to go, she said. Roman looked at her. Really looked. The way he did when the strategic calculation was done, and what remained was just him looking at her. And for a moment the hospital hallway was quiet, and the city blazed on outside, and the machines in Dominic's room kept their quiet vigil, and everything that was going to happen next was waiting just past the edge of the next decision. You don't have to, he started. Roman, she said. He stopped. I know I don't have to, she said. She walked toward the elevator. After a beat, she heard his footsteps behind her. The 14th floor server room was not on any official building schematic. Garrett found it anyway, because Garrett was the kind of man who found things that weren't supposed to be found, and he met them in the parking structure at 6:40 with a floor plan he'd drawn from memory on a folded piece of paper and the expression of someone who had assessed the situation and arrived at a number he wasn't entirely comfortable with. 3-hour window before Venn's people arrive, if Caldwell's source is accurate, he said. Building security does a sweep at 9. The room is behind the secondary HVAC corridor on the north side of 14. Access requires a keycard that doesn't exist in the building's official system. He paused. Which means whoever set it up had help from inside building management, probably going back years. Roman looked at the floor plan. Who's on the 14th floor legitimately? 3 tenant companies, all small, all quiet. One of them, a logistics consulting firm, has been there for 8 years and has a lease that renews automatically. Garrett folded the paper. DeLuca Holdings acquired the building 6 years ago. The logistics firm predates your ownership. Nobody looked at them because they were already there. Ven's, Roman said. Has to be. Avery stood at Roman's shoulder and looked at the floor plan. 8 years. Patient, Dominic had said about Ven. Extremely patient. 8 years of a ghost office in a building Ven had known Roman would eventually acquire, a server room behind an HVAC corridor, infrastructure for a plan that had been building since before Roman was even in a position to threaten it. She thought about what that kind of patience looked like from the inside. The long accumulation of it. The discipline of waiting. She thought it must feel something like the last 4 years of her life. The careful management of a situation with no good options, maintaining the surface while the pressure built underneath, waiting for a change that never arrived on its own. That was over now. One way or another, tonight. We go in at 7, Roman said. Garrett, on point. Avery, you're with me. We get in, we copy what's there, we get out before the sweep. He looked at Garrett. If Ven moves his timeline up, I have 2 people outside. They'll give us 12 minutes of warning minimum. Roman nodded. He looked at Avery. She met his eyes and nodded once, and that was the conversation. The logistics firm's office was dark and locked, the way all small offices are dark and locked at 7 in the evening, and the door opened on Garrett's third attempt with a device she didn't ask about and didn't need to understand. Inside, 2 desks, 2 chairs, a computer that hadn't been used in months based on the dust on its keyboard, a filing cabinet containing nothing, and a door at the back marked maintenance that opened into the HVAC corridor exactly as Garrett's drawing had shown. The server room was the size of a large closet. 4 rack-mounted servers, blinking steadily in the dark, processing something even now, even in the middle of the night, because data doesn't sleep. Roman went to the first rack while Garrett swept the corridor. Avery stood at the door and kept her eyes on the corridor entrance and her phone in her hand, timing. Roman worked fast. He'd brought a drive. The copy process was automated, something Caldwell had set up, designed to pull specific file signatures rather than everything. It moved through the first server. The second. 3 minutes in, it's in, Garrett's voice from the corridor. Quiet. Movement on the north stairwell. Avery looked at Roman. He looked at the drive. 60%. How many? Roman said. 2. Moving slow. Could be building maintenance. Could be, Avery said. She looked at the progress bar. 70%. Garrett appeared in the doorway. They're not maintenance, he said. They stopped on 14. Roman pulled the drive at 83%. Is it enough? Avery said. It has to be. He was already moving. They went the other way. South stairwell, Garrett leading, fast and quiet, in the way that fast and quiet is only possible when every person involved has decided not to panic and is operating on something steadier than panic, some compression of focus that exists in the body below thought. Avery's heart was loud in her own ears. Her footsteps on the metal stairs were soft. Roman's hand found her elbow on the second landing, steadying her where the stairwell turned, and she was briefly aware of the warmth of it through her sleeve before the next step required her full attention. Ground floor, service exit. The alley again, different from last night's alley, same desert air. They were half a block away when they heard the elevator open on 14. Nobody ran. Running draws attention. They walked at the pace of people who belong where they are and have somewhere to be, and Avery kept her breathing even and her eyes forward, and the city went on around them in its indifferent blaze. In the car, Roman looked at the drive in his hand. 83%, he said. Is it enough? She said again. He turned it over. Then he said, the ledger pages will be in there. They had to copy them before they could use them. You don't take originals if you want the originals to disappear cleanly. He looked up. It's enough. She let out a breath. He looked at her. She looked at him. The car was dark and the city lights came through the windows and moved across his face as they drove, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, and the thing that had been building since a hospital corridor and a quiet understanding and the word after sat between them without requiring words yet. After, she said. After, he confirmed. Caldwell worked through the night again. Avery did not. Roman made her go to bed at 1 in the morning with the directness that was not a request, and she went because she was past the point where pride was more useful than sleep, and she lay in the silk sheets of the room that had become hers over 3 weeks, and she slept without dreaming. She woke at 6 to Roman knocking on her door. "We have the pages," he said through the door. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard before. Not relief, something more controlled than relief, something that had moved through relief and come out the other side. "Caldwell says this case is complete." She sat up. "Ven. Caldwell is filing with the board this morning, and with the Nevada Securities Division." A pause. "And with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit." She sat with that for a moment. The full weight of it. 8 years, $11 million, a financial director who had disappeared. 4 years of waiting for the right moment to destroy a man. All of it documented, time-stamped, and now in the hands of people whose job was to do something about it. "Come in," she said. The door opened. He was in the hallway, leaning against the frame, and he looked like someone who had been awake for the second consecutive night and had reached the far side of it, where tiredness becomes a kind of clarity. His shirt was the same as yesterday. His hair was not managed. His face was entirely unguarded in the early morning light, in a way she had only seen in fragments before. She looked at him from the bed. He looked at her from the doorway. "You said after," he said. "I did." "It's after." She got up. She crossed to the door and she stood in front of him and she said, "I know what the contract says. I know what December looks like on paper." She held his gaze. "I don't want December." He was very still. "I signed a contract with you," she said. "I want to make a different agreement, one where neither of us is performing anything." She paused. "I want to stay. Not because you need a wife and not because I need the money, because I chose this and it took me 3 weeks in a server room and your father in a hospital bed to understand that choosing it was the whole point." She stopped. "Say something." He reached up and put his hand against her face, just his palm, against her cheek, and his thumb at the edge of her jaw. And the warmth of it was the warmest thing she'd felt in a very long time. Warm in the way that things are warm when they come after a long cold, when your body finally registers that the temperature has changed. "I've been in love with you," he said. Since you told a dying man he sounded like a lawyer, and he laughed for the first time in 6 months. He paused. "I didn't plan for that." "No," she said. "Neither did I." She kissed him. Or he kissed her. The distinction collapsed somewhere in the middle, in the doorway of a room in a house that was becoming genuinely hers, in the early morning of a day that was already different from all the days before it. The board reconvened 3 weeks later. Ven did not attend. His attorney filed a withdrawal of all pending motions on his behalf and offered no explanation, which was the kind of explanation that explained everything. The FBI investigation had opened quietly. It would proceed slowly, the way those investigations always did, grinding forward with the institutional patience of something that did not need to hurry because the outcome was already determined. 2 of the 3 board members who had supported Ven's coalition resigned in the intervening weeks. The Chen bloc, it turned out, had voted to table not because they were undecided, but because they had known something was wrong with Ven's documentation and had wanted time to confirm it. Victor Chen, the elder brother, told Roman this over a lunch that Avery attended at Roman's request, and he said it with the directness of a man who had been in business long enough to know when to back a position and when to step back from one. "Your father built something worth protecting," Victor said. He looked at Avery when he said it. "It helps to have people around you who understand that." After the lunch, walking back through the building's lobby, Roman said, "Hara voted to table because of you." "What?" "Hara told me afterward. He said the woman at the table looked like she believed what she was there for." He glanced at her sidelong. He said it settled something for him. She thought about that, about the navy dress and the diamond ring and showing up in a boardroom on no sleep, because she'd decided that the thing she was protecting was worth protecting. "I did believe it," she said. He took her hand. The ring caught the lobby light. Dominic came home from Desert Valley 4 days after the cardiac event. It was thinner and slower, and he required more assistance than he had before. And he accepted this with the particular resignation of a man who had run out of the energy to fight his own body and had redirected that energy toward the things that still responded to fighting. He sat in the sunroom at his house in the afternoon light, and he read the newspapers and he talked on the phone with board members and attorneys, and people whose names Avery was still learning, and twice a week Roman brought her there for dinner. The dinners were not formal. They were the small, real version of family, the kind that didn't require performance, that had arrived at a place past the point where performance was necessary or useful. Dominic asked Avery about her students, remembered their names, asked follow-up questions about the ones she'd mentioned previously. Marco came sometimes. The relationship between the brothers was not repaired. Repairs implied something that had been whole before, and Avery wasn't sure that was accurate. But it was building, carefully, the way things build when the people involved have decided that the cost of not building is higher than the cost of the effort. One evening in October, sitting in Dominic's garden after dinner while Roman and Marco were inside arguing about something that was almost certainly nothing, Dominic said, "You're going to stay." She looked at him. The garden was warm with the last of the desert heat, the light going amber and long. He was in the wheelchair with a blanket across his lap, looking at the roses he'd grown since his wife had died, because she'd loved them and he'd never stopped tending them. "Yes," she said. He nodded, once, like it confirmed something he'd known for a while and had simply been waiting to hear said aloud. "He'll be different," Dominic said. "He already is. You won't always recognize the change as change. It'll look like ordinary things. Him being home earlier, him reading in the kitchen instead of the study, him talking about the future in a way that isn't just strategic." He paused. "Those are the things that matter, not the grand gestures." She thought about this kitchen island, the Broken Spine novels, the coffee he'd made for her on the first morning, black, because he'd paid attention. "I know," she said. "Good," he said. "That's good. Awesome." She called Dana in early November. Not a crisis call, not an update call, just a call, the kind she'd been making to Dana since they were 19 years old in the same dormitory, the kind that didn't require a reason. Dana listened while she talked about the board, about Ven's investigation, about Dominic's garden and Marco's slow reconstruction, and the server room and the archive and all the pieces she hadn't been able to tell while they were still in motion. She talked for a long time. Dana let her. "So," Dana said when she finished, "you're staying." "I'm staying. In Las Vegas. For now. Eventually." She paused. "We haven't mapped everything out yet. I'm going back to teaching in January. There are schools here." A beat. Then, "Avery?" "What?" "You sound happy." A pause. "I don't mean that as a question. I mean it as a statement. You sound like yourself except also happy, which is a version of you I haven't heard in a while." She looked out the window of the room that was hers, the enormous bed, the expensive ceiling, the Las Vegas skyline beyond the glass, all of it familiar now in the way that places become familiar when you stop marking time in them and start living. "I didn't plan for this," she said. "Nobody plans for the real thing," Dana said. "That's how you know." Dominic DeLuca died on a Wednesday in late November. It was early morning, the quiet end of a night that had been peaceful, Elena present, Roman and Marco both there, by the time it happened, because Elena had called them at 3 in the morning with a certainty that turned out to be accurate. Avery was there too, sitting in the hallway outside the room, not inside because that space belonged to his sons, but present because presence was what she could offer, and it was not nothing. She heard Marco cry. A single sound, low and brief, the kind that escapes when everything held breaks at once, and then quiet. She heard Roman's silence, which was longer and said more. When he came out of the room, she stood up. He looked at her, and she opened her arms and he came into them without hesitation, without the managed stillness, without the glass. He put his face against the side of her head and he breathed, and she held on, and the hallway was quiet, and the morning was gray outside the narrow window, and the machines in the room had gone silent. She held on for a long time. He didn't cry. She had the sense he might, later, in private, in the way that people cry who have learned to do it alone. She didn't try to access that. She just held the weight of him and let the morning be what it was. "He knew," she said quietly, into his hair. He knew everything he needed to know. Roman was still for a moment. Then, "I know," he said. His voice was rough and real. "I know he did." The funeral was private. The public memorial 2 weeks later was not. It was the kind of event that Dominic would have found excessive and would have attended anyway, because he understood that some things are performed not for the person being honored, but for the community doing the honoring. Roman stood through it with the particular bearing of a man who had been prepared for this, and was still not prepared, which is the only way anyone is ever prepared for grief. Avery stood beside him. She wore black and she held his hand and she did not perform anything. She was just there, which was what she had become. Someone who was just there. Marco gave the remarks. He talked about his father's hands, the specific hands of a builder, rough-edged and strong even at the end, and about a man who had loved one woman completely and had spent 40 years after her death tending her roses because love, his father had believed, did not require a living recipient to be worth expressing. It was not a polished eulogy. It was better than polished. It was true. Afterward, in the car, Roman said, he would have liked that. He did like Marco, Avery said. He just didn't say it enough. None of us said enough. He was looking out the window. That's the consistent failure of our family. She took his hand. He turned it and laced his fingers through hers, and she felt the specific weight of his grip. Not desperate, not performative. Just certain. The grip of someone who had decided something and was holding it. January came with a cold front that the desert didn't know how to accommodate. Temperatures dropping unseasonably. The mountains to the west holding snow that seemed to surprise the city, even though the mountains always held snow in January. Avery started at a school in Henderson, a public high school with a good English department and a vice principal who had reviewed her Sacramento record with the expression of someone who couldn't quite believe what they were looking at. She went back to 10th grade literature. She went back to the 40-minute periods and the chairs that scraped on linoleum and the particular smell of classrooms that had held 100 different students and retained something of all of them. She went back to standing in front of rooms full of people who were hoping she'd stumble and finding that she didn't. The first week, a student asked her if she was married. The way 10th graders ask, direct, without context, the random targeting of adolescent social curiosity. She looked at the ring. At the diamond that had started everything, that she still wore not because of what it had meant at the beginning, but because of what it meant now. Yes, she said. Is he nice? The student said. She thought about Roman in the kitchen at 2 a.m. with coffee he'd made without being asked. About the Broken Spine novels and the garden at Dominic's house, and a man crying in a hospital corridor with his face in his hands for one unguarded moment before reassembling himself. About a hand on her cheek in a doorway in the early morning, and the word after holding the weight of everything they hadn't said yet. He's complicated, she said. But yes, he's nice. They renewed their vows in April. Not because the original ceremony had been meaningless, it had meant something, even drunk, even at midnight in a chapel with a man named Gerald in a bolo tie, in the way that all true things mean something regardless of the conditions of their arrival, but because they wanted words spoken deliberately, words chosen rather than fallen into. It was small. Marco. Dana, who flew in from Sacramento with an expression of complete vindication that she had the grace not to state explicitly. Elena, who stood in the back row and wept with the composure of someone who did not intend to weep and had decided to accept it anyway. A handful of people who had known Dominic, who had known Roman long enough to understand what the change in him represented. No officiant with a bolo tie this time. A civil ceremony. A judge who was someone Dominic had known, who performed it with the brevity appropriate to a moment that didn't need embellishment. Roman's vows were short. He had written them himself, which she knew because the handwriting on the card he held was his, sharp, precise, the handwriting of someone who had taught himself not to be sloppy with anything. He said, I was honest with you about what I needed before I was honest with myself about what I wanted. You stayed anyway. Everything that follows is because you stayed. She had written hers in the guest room the night before while he was asleep, sitting on the bed in the lamplight with a legal pad, drafting and crossing out and drafting again the way she drafted lesson plans, trying to find the language that was accurate without being precious. She said, I came here for practical reasons. I stayed for true ones. I have been trying to find the right language for the difference, and the closest I can get is this. Practical reasons ask what something costs. True ones ask what it's worth. You are worth more than anything I calculated when I signed my name the first time. I know that now. I'm signing it again, Dana cried, audibly. She didn't try to stop herself. Time moved the way it moves after the storm. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the accumulating weight of days that become a life. The Venn investigation closed 18 months later with a federal indictment on 4 counts, 2 of which resulted in convictions. Marcus Venn's carefully patient 8-year project ended in a courtroom in the most prosaic way that large schemes end: paperwork, testimony, a jury's attention. The man who had waited years to destroy Roman DeLuca was destroyed by the evidence he had created himself. Roman transitioned the holding company. Not entirely. The architecture of what Dominic had built was too dense for a clean transformation, and Roman was not a man who did things that required him to lie to himself about what they were. But he rebuilt the edges of it. He shed the relationships that required the most darkness to maintain. He brought in partners who operated in light. It was a years-long process, grinding and imperfect and real, and he did it with the same patience he brought to everything, except that this time the patience had a direction, a point it was moving toward. He tended Dominic's roses. He had them transplanted from the house after the estate settled, brought to their own garden, put in by a landscaper who knew what she was doing and didn't need to be told twice. In the spring they came up exactly as they'd come up at the old house, red and particular and a little difficult, which had been Dominic's wife's preference, and which Dominic had never changed. Avery kept teaching. She got good at the Henderson School in the way she'd gotten good at Sacramento, through the accumulation of years and the specific stubbornness of someone who believes that what she's doing matters and holds to that belief even when the evidence is slow to arrive. She kept the ring. Both rings, the original one, wild and excessive and accidental, and the quieter band from the April ceremony. She wore them together, stacked, because one was the accident and one was the choice. And she had decided a long time ago that the accident was not something to be corrected or replaced, but something to be carried alongside the choice. Because without the accident, there would have been no choice. And the whole complicated chain of it had led to exactly where she was. One evening in late summer, a Sunday, the specific late light of a Sunday evening in the desert, when the heat has peaked and begun its retreat, and the sky takes on colors that look invented. She was sitting in the garden with a book she wasn't reading, half watching Roman at the far end of the lawn, where their daughter was pulling herself up against his legs, new at standing, fierce about it, approaching the project of walking with the same quality of determined focus that her father brought to everything, and that Avery had apparently also passed along, because the combination was formidable in a 2-year-old. Their son was inside. She could hear him through the open door, talking to no one in the specific way of 4-year-olds, narrating his own activity. Roman caught her watching him, and he didn't look away. He held it, the specific, complete way he held things when he wasn't managing them. And in the distance between them, across the summer garden, with the roses at the far wall and the sky going colors that looked invented, she felt the thing she had felt in a hospital corridor and a server room and a boardroom and a Las Vegas bedroom on a morning she had woken up not knowing where she was. Chosen, not fallen into, not contracted, not convenient or practical or a solution to a solvable problem. Chosen, which was different from all of those things, which was the only thing that, at the end, was worth the name. Roman set their daughter on her feet and pointed her in Avery's direction, and she took 3 wobbling steps and sat down abruptly on the grass, and looked at her own hands with an expression of magnificent indignation, and Roman laughed, a real laugh, the kind that had been rare and was becoming less rare, the kind that meant what it sounded like. Avery set down the book. She went to them. The desert evening came down around them, warm and enormous, and the city blazed somewhere beyond the garden walls, and the roses held the last of the light in the way that red things hold light, briefly, completely, before the dark. Some stories begin with the worst decision of your life. Some of them, not all, not most, but some, are honest enough to become something else entirely. And the something else is not what you planned. It is better than what you planned, because you didn't plan it at all. You just chose it, one morning at a time, until choosing it became the thing you were made of. That is the whole of it. That is enough.